Chapter 655. Spain was a constitutional monarchy located in the southwest of Europe. In modern history, Spain was an important cultural birthplace. During the Renaissance, it was the most powerful country in Europe. From the middle of the 15th century to the end of the 16th century, Spain became an empire that influenced the whole world. The number of countries that used Spanish as their official language ranked second in the world, second only to English. Spain had a total of more than 4 million players and a vast territory. It was considered a powerful country in Europe. In comparison, the star nation that was destroyed by Shanghai City seemed insignificant. No matter how confident Ouyang Shuo was, he wasn't arrogant enough to conquer Spain in one fell swoop. He had no choice but to start a war. The purpose of Ouyang Shuo's strategy was to prevent the national war from turning into an all-out war, but also to give the Spanish invincible fleet a painful lesson, to knock away their arrogance, and to make the Spanish maintain enough reverence for Shanghai City. To be honest, it was very difficult. It was hard to say if they could defeat the Spanish invincible fleet with just one formation. Not to mention, there would be a large number of Spanish players participating in the war. It would be lucky for the Spanish fleet to escape unscathed. Ouyang Shuo wasn't a reckless person. When he destroyed the first Spanish battleship, he was indeed angry and didn't think too much. But when he decided to destroy the 20 Spanish fleets nearby, Ouyang Shuo already had a plan in mind. His trump card was the Atlantis city. In his previous life, the large-scale storyline mission, The Lost Atlantis, involved hundreds of thousands of players. Ouyang Shuo carefully recalled the information about the quest that was revealed on the forum. He was confident that he could complete the storyline quest on his own. Not to mention the mission reward, the situation would be very different if Atlantis reappeared in the Mediterranean Sea. That night, Ouyang Shuo took an ordinary ship and left the Strait of Gibraltar with Little Qing and the Divine Martial Guards, heading straight for the sea where Atlantis was located. Ouyang Shuo was calm, but Spain was in an uproar. The Spanish players didn't expect that the Shanghai City fleet would have the guts to initiate a war. Knowing that more than 20 battleships had been sunk by Shanghai City and even the port of Gibraltar had been captured, the Spanish players were even more furious and clamored for revenge. At the end of the 16th century, Spain's invincible fleet was defeated by the British Navy led by the pirate Drake. From then on, Spain lost its status as a maritime power and began to decline. In the mid-17th century, Spain ceded Gibraltar to Britain during the War of the Spanish Succession. Until the 21st century, Gibraltar was still under British control. Spain once tried to take Gibraltar from the British, but to no avail. It was only after the establishment of the Earth Federation that the matter was left unsettled. It could be said that Gibraltar was a scar on Spain. In the game, Gaia had assigned Gibraltar to Spain based on the principle of proximity. Now that it was occupied by the Shanghai City fleet, it immediately stirred a sensitive nerve among the Spanish. Let the arrogant Easterners pay the price. Chase Shanghai City's fleet out of the Mediterranean Sea, the Spanish player declared. Spain's coastline was long, and more than half of the country's borders were coastlines. Coupled with the country's glorious naval history, the most powerful Spanish lords were basically coastal lords. The Spanish invincible fleet was just a general term, not a specific fleet. This was because the Spanish lords had more than 30 fleets under their command. In addition, even the players' guilds in the country liked to form fleets and go out to sea together for adventures. In his previous life, the Lucky Bic was the leader of a small mercenary group. Early the next morning, the various fleets spontaneously gathered at the Strait of Gibraltar. Shanghai City occupied the port of Gibraltar, but Zheng He's fleet did not plan to fight the Spanish fleet head-on. That would be too foolish, and it was obvious that they would not win. Zheng He's strategy was to use the superior mobility of Shanghai City's fleet to launch a surprise attack at sea. In a short period of time, it would be difficult to determine the victor between the two fleets. Strait of Gibraltar, a nameless sea area. Under Little Green's guidance, Ouyang Shua's battleship finally arrived at its destination. Little Green was indeed a quasi-divine beast. After applying top-grade medicine on its back, the wound had already scabbed over after a night, and it could enter the water again. As he was not sure of the situation at the bottom of the sea, Ouyang Shua did not dare to rashly head there alone. Therefore, he had to get Little Green to dive to the bottom of the sea again to collect more underwater breathing apparatus. Although the underwater breathing apparatus was powerful, it was a common item in Atlantis City. Atlantis worshipped the sea god Poseidon, so many of their technological products were related to the sea. Underwater breathing apparatus was just one of the gadgets. When Atlantis sank to the bottom of the sea, underwater breathing apparatus were scattered all over the city ruins. If players wanted to participate in the large-scale storyline mission, The Lost Atlantis, they had to obtain an underwater breathing apparatus, dive to the bottom of the sea, and enter the city ruins personally. In his previous life, there were players who made a lot of money just by selling underwater breathing apparatus. Ouyang Shua gave Little Green a large net and hung it around its neck. In less than half an hour, Little Green returned with the large net filled with underwater breathing apparatus. After a rough count, there were more than 300 of them. Fortunately, Little Green was brave. Otherwise, it would not have been easy to drag such heavy things in the water. After going back and forth 4 times, each of the Shenwu guards had an underwater breathing apparatus. "Let's go!" Ouyang Shua put on the underwater breathing apparatus and was the first to jump into the sea, creating a splash. Then, like dumplings falling into a pot, 1,000 Shenwu guards and their personal guards jumped into the sea and dived towards the bottom of the sea. The warship that carried them immediately left to avoid attracting the attention of the Spanish fleet. The seawater of the Strait of Gibraltar was clear, and the environment was excellent. Coupled with Gaia's optimization in the game and the lack of industrial pollution, it was more like a fairyland. In the azure blue seawater, colorful fishes swam back and forth in groups. Seeing Ouyang Shua and his party, they were not afraid, and actually came over excitedly. On the other hand, the sea monsters and giant beasts had already escaped without a trace when they sensed Little Green's aura. Ouyang Shua saw this and smiled. Speaking of which, this was Ouyang Shua's first time diving. He had never enjoyed such treatment in real life, let alone diving in the open sea. Furthermore, he did not need to carry heavy diving equipment. After putting on the underwater breathing apparatus, Ouyang Shua felt like he had transformed into a fish and was swimming in the sea. He rode on Little Green and slowly swam towards the bottom of the sea. After diving for a few hundred meters, the water pressure kept increasing. The magical effect of the underwater breathing apparatus was once again demonstrated. Not only could it provide oxygen, but it could also automatically adjust the water pressure. Even when diving deep into the sea, Ouyang Shua could not feel the existence of the water pressure at all. At 1,000 meters, he could see the real underwater continent. The bottom of the strait in the game was still clear, and the mysterious city of Atlantis slowly appeared in Ouyang Shua's vision. The legendary city of Atlantis was designed in the shape of concentric circles, separated by warships. As one went deeper into the center, the identity restrictions gradually became stricter. The inner circle of the circle was the most important temple and reserve. For Atlantis, 3 was one of its important characteristics. The lines repeated 3 times, the buildings formed by 3 similar buildings, and the 3 pyramids formed a group of towers. The streets of every level of the city were distributed diagonally, from one corner of the beach to the other. There were many complicated underground corridors. The capital of Atlantis, Poseidonia, represented the essence of the great western continent. It was the concentrated embodiment of culture, art, and craftsmanship. It was a monumental city, a model for other countries. However, what appeared in Ouyang Shua's eyes was the ruins of a huge city. In the azure seawater, There were dilapidated temples, giant round pillars that had fallen to the left and right, and huge sculptures that had fallen into the mud. The standing sculptures were also incomplete, and the spears in their hands had been broken into two. Everything seemed to be telling of the decline of a civilization. A desolate and tragic feeling assaulted Ouyang Shua's senses. He could even smell the scent of time. Decayed, broken, and heartless. Even so, Ouyang Shua could still glimpse the glory and splendid civilization of Atlantis from the ruins. The city had a well-planned municipal system, exquisite sculptures, and great buildings. Even the most ordinary of stones were carved with unknown and beautiful patterns. Without a doubt, this was a great civilization. Unfortunately, corals, seaweed, and other vegetation had already quietly climbed up the walls, pillars, and sculptures. They had taken root and gradually cultivated a new ecosystem. Schools of fish swam freely among the broken walls of the city, and there was no lack of overlords of the sea like sharks. The entire city glowed with a different kind of vitality. The protagonists of the city, the Atlanteans, were nowhere to be seen. Even sharks had to retreat from the murderous aura that the divine guards emitted. After landing, Ouyang Shua casually picked up an underwater breathing apparatus and kept it in his storage bag. Looking at the dilapidated civilization, Ouyang Shua could not help but sigh. Could it be that no matter how great a civilization or how glorious an empire is, it can't escape the corrosion of time? Then what is the grand goal that he fought for his whole life compared to this? Ouyang Shua's eyes inevitably showed a trace of confusion. Ouyang Shua stood alone in the ruins of the city in a daze. However, the divine guards spontaneously spread out and guarded the marquee, ensuring that no one would hurt the marquee. At this moment, a whisper came from the empty ruins. "Welcome, fated person." The voice was hoarse, and there was wisdom in the vicissitudes of life. "Who?" Ouyang Shua instantly woke up, and his eyes became sharp again. P.S. The update time has been unstable recently. Xingxiao is ashamed. I didn't want to say anything at first, but the recommendation votes are too low. Please vote more. Also, the monthly votes are ranked 9th. There's no improvement compared to last month. Please vote more. Thank you. Chapter 656. A man wearing a long robe and a spear walked out from behind the stone pillar. He wore a strange mask. The spear looked exactly the same as the spear held by the temple guards in the ruins. The carvings on the mask were of the same style as the carvings on the city stones. With Ouyang Shua's knowledge, the style of the carvings was similar to the legendary Mayan civilization. It was obvious that the person in front of him was the Atlantean that Ouyang Shua was looking for. The strangest thing was that the masked man had a purple crystal the size of a thumb hanging around his neck. The crystal was octahedral and looked even more mysterious under the reflection of the seawater. The only pity was that the crystal itself was a little dim. Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed. "Who are you? Why aren't you willing to show your face?" "Fated person, please follow me." The masked man didn't reply. He turned around and walked into the depths of the ruins. "Follow me," Ouyang Shua ordered decisively. Atlantis City had become the life-saving straw for the ocean fleet. Ouyang Shua had no choice. Following the masked man through the ruins of the city, Ouyang Shua was even more shocked. What he saw was only the tip of the iceberg. Magnificent temples, more exquisite statues, and taller stone pillars could be seen everywhere. Ouyang Shua saw a statue lying in the mud. Its head alone was more than 5 meters tall. It was quite terrifying. Ouyang Shua couldn't help but recall the concentric architectural style of Atlantis City. Obviously, they were walking deeper into the concentric circles. Even though it had collapsed into ruins, Atlantis City still maintained its strict hierarchy. After walking for an hour, they arrived in front of a majestic temple. The temple was located in the center of the concentric circles. It showed that this temple was extraordinary and had a supreme status. The overall architectural style of the temple was very similar to the Parthenon temple in Athens that Ouyang Shua had visited not long ago. Even the pillars and statues around the temple were similar. Fated person, ask your guards to wait outside. Only you can go in now, the masked man said. Ouyang Shua hesitated for a moment and stopped Chen Damring and the others from persuading him. He said in a low voice, "You guys wait outside. If you have time, search the ruins for underwater breathing devices or other items." Underwater breathing devices were good stuff. Ouyang Shua was too embarrassed to take them along the way. Now that there was an opportunity, he naturally didn't want to miss it. Other than the underwater breathing apparatus, the divine martial guards might be able to find other treasures. Yes. Chen Daming nodded. Having been with the Marquis for a long time, Chen Daming had a general understanding of the Marquis's style of doing things. He looked casual, but in fact, he was extremely cautious. The fact that he asked them to stand guard outside meant that there would be no danger. Ouyang Shua brought little Qing and followed the masked man into the temple. In the hall of the temple, there was a magnificent statue of a god. The god was tall and burly, with a face full of beard. He held a trident in his left hand and a huge conch in his right. "Poseidon!" Ouyang Shua exclaimed. Woo! When little Qing saw the statue of Poseidon, it let out an unhappy provocation. "It's the sea god." The masked man casually glanced at little Qing. As he spoke, he walked to the left side of the hall. There was a stone staircase leading down. The two sides of the stairs were dark, and the steps were covered with seaweed. If one was not careful, they would slip. Strangely, the deeper they went, the brighter the staircase became. The light seemed to come from underground. Ouyang Shua calculated in his mind. After walking for about 5.5 meters, an azure light screen suddenly appeared in front of them. It was overflowing with colorful lights and looked mysterious. The mysterious light screen blocked the seawater outside. Through the light screen, Ouyang Shua could vaguely see a city. "This is?" Ouyang Shua was surprised. "This is our place of survival." The masked man's voice contained a trace of sorrow that could not be concealed. Ouyang Shua understood. They were buried in the depths of the sea, never to see the light of day, and spent countless years in loneliness. Such an ignoble existence was not a good thing for any civilization. Their bodies passed through the light screen without any obstruction. The scene in front of them stunned Ouyang Shua. They stood on a cliff and looked down. There were waterfalls, flowing springs, birds chirping, and flowers fragrant. It was a beautiful scene. Big and small blue lakes dotted the landscape. On the lakes, boats floated by. There were people on the boats, casting nets to catch fish. They looked happy. By the lake, there were beauties washing clothes and children playing. It was a happy and harmonious scene. Beautiful buildings were hidden among the green flowers. It was like a paradise. This scene was completely different from the lonely and decadent scene that Ouyang Shua had imagined. From this, it could be seen how powerful the ruler of Atlantis was. All the loneliness and pain were completely shouldered by the inheritor alone. For ordinary people, wasn't this paradise a good place to return to? Thinking of this, Ouyang Shua glanced at the masked man beside him. Ouyang Shua recognized the purple crystal hanging on the neck of the masked man. The person who held this crystal must be a core figure of the Atlantis race. Moreover, it must be a small part of the core. As if feeling Ouyang Shua's gaze, or perhaps because he had reached home, the masked man slowly took off his mask. Under the mask was a young woman. She had long red hair, big dark blue eyes, long eyelashes, three-dimensional and exquisite facial features, and thick lips that were filled with a different kind of temptation. Ouyang Shua was dumbstruck when he saw her. "Hello, I'm Kalia. Welcome to Atlantis." The beautiful woman's voice was crisp and sweet. The hoarse voice that she had at the beginning was just a disguise. Facing Kalia's white and tender palm, Ouyang Shua was slightly startled. He gently clenched and loosened his grip. "Hello, how can a mutant be naked? Sorry to disturb you." Kalia was undoubtedly a peerless beauty. Although her figure was covered by a long robe, it was obvious that she was extremely seductive with curves in all the right places. Coupled with the unique temperament of the Atlantis people, she was even more charming. Ouyang Shuo was not an ordinary person. Beauty was just a layer of skin to him. He would appreciate it, but he would never indulge in it. His mind was already as firm as a rock. Kalia was surprised when she saw Ouyang Shuo's clear eyes. Her beauty was also unique in her race. It was unknown how many men had been charmed by her. Since she was young, Kalia grew up in the sound of praises. This was the first time she saw someone indifferent to her beauty. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. There are fewer and fewer fish in the lake. The lives of my people are getting more and more difficult. If this goes on, it will be difficult to continue living here in less than 10 years. Kalia looked at the city below the cliff with a lonely expression. Don't worry. You won't have to wait for 10 years. You will be able to live on land immediately. Ouyang Shuo comforted her. Hearing this, Kalia's eyes lit up. She put her palms together and said with a pious expression, "That's right. Thanks to the blessing of the sea god, we have finally met the fated person." Cough. Kalia's fiery gaze made Ouyang Shuo a little uncomfortable. What should we do now? Let's go. I will bring you down. How do we go down? Ouyang Shuo was dumbfounded. They were standing on a cliff. Kalia smiled and went through a small door to the right side of the cliff. He saw that the entire place had been hollowed out and built into a spacious hall. In the hall, there was a shark-like skeleton. But it was not a shark. Ouyang Shuo could clearly see the metallic luster of the skeleton. Obviously, this was a man-made metal skeleton. Just based on this exquisite skeleton, Ouyang Shuo had a whole new level of respect for Atlantis technology. With Shanghai City's current industrial level, even if they had the blueprints, they wouldn't be able to manufacture it. When he got closer, the shark skeleton looked like an aircraft. It had wings on both sides and a cabin in the middle for people to sit in. But he didn't see any power system or any electronic equipment. Instead, the surface of the skeleton was engraved with complex carvings of the same style as the carvings on buildings. Presumably, this carving technique was one of the core technologies of the Atlantis civilization. It was widely used in buildings, accessories, machinery, and other fields. It was simply omnipotent. However, Korea didn't care about it. He sat in the driver's seat skillfully and inserted the purple crystal hanging around his neck into a groove in front. It fit perfectly and turned it to the left. Kacha, the shark actually, came to life and made a rumbling sound. The patterns on the surface of the shark flashed with blue light. The attentive Ouyang Shuo noticed that when Kalia removed the purple crystal, the crystal became dimmer and dimmer. It's really magical. Ouyang Shuo sighed with emotion. Presumably, the crystal was the energy source that drove the shark. Come in. Kalia called out to the dazed Ouyang Shuo. Oh! Ouyang Shuo got up and sat in the left cabin. The shark aircraft was not big. It was similar to the fighter planes of World War II. It had a total of 2 seats. Sitting beside Kalia, Ouyang Shuo faintly smelled a peculiar fragrance. It was the body fragrance of a young girl. It was probably Kalia's first time being so close to a man. A trace of red light flashed across his face. He controlled the shark aircraft and slowly flew away from the cliff toward the city below. Looking down from the sky, Atlantis City was exquisite. But compared to the ruins of the underwater city, it was much smaller. It was estimated to be the size of a town. In the end, it's still a caged bird. Ouyang Shuo somewhat understood the loneliness in Kalia's eyes. It was common sense for people to yearn for a free life. After all, no one really wanted to be trapped in such a small town for the rest of their lives and die alone. In less than 10 minutes, the aircraft stopped at the square of a castle in the center of the city. This is our palace, Kalia introduced. Seeing Kalia walking unimpeded into the depths of the palace, Ouyang Shuo's eyes flashed. This woman's identity was indeed not simple. No matter how much Atlantis City had declined, it was still a huge empire. Moreover, the hierarchy was strict. How could the palace be freely entered and exited? The only explanation was that Kaliao was simply a member of the royal family. Perhaps she was a princess. A princess? It's very similar to a night novel. Ouyang Shuo mocked himself. Chapter 657. The palace was unusually deserted. Other than a few guards in key positions, there was no one else. After passing through another palace, Ouyang Shuo couldn't help but ask, "Kalia, are you the kingdom's princess?" Kalia paused, turned around and said, "I was before." Before? Ouyang Shuo was puzzled. "Half a year ago, my father passed away, and I succeeded the throne," Kalia said calmly. Ouyang Shuo was speechless. So Kalia wasn't a princess, but the queen of Atlantis. "My condolences," Ouyang Shuo said apologetically. Kalia smiled. "Father passed away peacefully. It's a kind of relief." Ouyang Shuo was silent. In other words, the heavy burden of the Atlantis race was on the shoulders of this woman in front of him? No wonder Kalia's eyes were full of vicissitudes at such a young age. The two of them walked in silence, and finally arrived at a hall deep in the palace. They didn't know where Kalia pressed a mechanism, but the floor of the hall slowly descended, and then they entered an underground cave. The cave was huge, and the end couldn't be seen. The dome was at least 20 meters high. The whole cave was dark and damp, and there was only a dazzling golden light in the center. In the middle of the cave, there was a golden pool with a length and width of 1 meter. The pool was flowing with a viscous golden liquid. It looked like it was about to dry up. A fist-sized golden crystal was suspended above the pool. The shape of the crystal was exactly the same as the purple crystal hanging around Kalia's neck. Just like the purple crystal, the golden crystal was also dim, as if it would fall into the water at any time. Even the corner of the light still illuminated the pool. The golden crystal was surrounded by irregular stone shields. The surface of the shields was carved with lifelike human faces. They were like guards, loyally guarding the golden crystal. Ouyang Shuo roughly counted. There were 12 shields of different sizes. That's the golden magnetite stone, the energy source of our Atlantis civilization. 10,000 years ago, a disaster suddenly came to the empire. It was the magnetite stone that formed an energy barrier and protected this corner of the land. It was buried in the depths of the sea with the ruins of the city, Kalia explained. The magnetite stone is the lifeline of Atlantis. Is it also hanging around your neck? Ouyang Shuo asked. That's right. Korea nodded. Magnetite can absorb sunlight and turn the energy of the universe into energy. From low to high, they could be divided into 5 grades: white, green, blue, purple, and gold. Low-grade magnetite stones are all derived from high-grade magnetite stones. From the looks of it, the situation with the golden magnetic ore isn't looking good. Ouyang Shuo took the initiative to change the topic of the mission. At this time, Zheng He was leading the ocean-going fleet to contend with the Spanish fleet. Every moment that Ouyang Shuo delayed meant that the ocean-going fleet would be in more danger. Korea's eyes dimmed. Not bad. The energy barrier formed by the magnetite ore consumes a lot of energy. After maintaining it for so long, no matter how strong the magnetite ore is, it can't hold on any longer. What can I do? Ouyang Shuo asked. Yes. Korea nodded. Right at this moment, the sound of the system notification entered Ouyang Shuo's ears. System notification. Congratulations to player. Don't say you don't have clothes. You have officially activated the S-rank large-scale storyline mission, The Lost Atlantis. Mission background. 10,000 years ago, a huge tsunami and earthquake suddenly destroyed the city of Atlantis, causing it to sink to the bottom of the sea. Surprisingly, a small number of people survived under the protection of the Golden Magnetic Oregon mission requirement, Fill up the golden pool with golden liquid and recharge the golden magnetic Oregon. Raise the disappeared city of Atlantis to the surface of the sea and reappear in the world. Mission reward: unknown. Friendly reminder: players will receive different mission rewards if they choose different side missions. If the mission fails, there will be corresponding punishment. Please choose the side missions carefully. Side Mission 1. Complete the storyline mission alone. Upon completion, the reward will be 1 item of Atlantis top technology, 1 purple crystal, 50,000 achievement points, 150,000 reputation points, and other rewards. Side Mission 2. Share the storyline mission and invite other players to complete it together. Upon completion, the reward will be 1 item of Atlantis intermediate technology, 1 blue crystal, 10,000 achievement points, and 30,000 reputation points. Friendly reminder: if players choose the first side mission, failure will result in a deduction of 200,000 gold coins, 100,000 achievement points, and 300,000 reputation points. If the deduction is insufficient, the corresponding real-life achievement points will be deducted. If the real-life achievement points are insufficient, the deduction will be negative until the deduction is completed. If players choose the second side mission, failure will not result in any mandatory punishment. The difficulty of the 2 side missions was as different as heaven and earth. The mission rewards were also very different, and the punishment for failure was even more different. The former was high risk and high reward, while the latter was low risk and had a considerable reward. If one was not a crazy gambler, one would not choose the first side mission. It was obvious how difficult it was to complete an S-grade storyline mission alone. It was almost impossible. In his previous life, Bick had struggled for a long time. In the end, he gave up the temptation of the first side mission and chose the second side mission. If Ouyang Shua did not have the advantage of being reborn, he would not have chosen the first side mission, which was a risky option. Now it was different. He had the confidence to complete this side mission alone. Choose the first side mission, Ouyang Shua said without hesitation. System notification: mission side mission selection has been completed. It can no longer be changed. As soon as the system notification ended, Korea continued as if he had received an instruction. The golden liquid in the pool is actually made of refined gold. 1 gold coin can only produce 5 drops of golden liquid. Even though Ouyang Shua was mentally prepared, he could not help but draw a gasp. According to standard titration, 1 liter of golden liquid contained 10,000 drops of golden liquid. It required 2,000 gold coins to refine. The pool in front of him was a meter in length, width, and depth. It could hold a cubic meter, which was 1,000 liters of golden liquid. In other words, it would take 2 million gold coins to fill the pond. At this stage in the world, Ouyang Shua was probably the only person who could fork out 2 million gold coins at once. It had to be said that Bick's choice in his previous life was very wise. It was no wonder that this storyline mission in his previous life had involved hundreds of thousands of players. It was almost impossible to fill up the pond with one's own strength. Ouyang Shua wanted to make the impossible possible. He was confident that Gaia would not release a mission that would cause players to suffer losses. With such a harsh setting, the rewards after completion would definitely be very generous. Got it. Ouyang Shua nodded as he took out his storage bag and aimed it at the pool. Gold coins flowed out of the storage bag like flowing water, converging into a golden trickle. The moment the golden trickle entered the pool, it was refined into drops of golden liquid by a mysterious force. It began to flow at the bottom of the pool, glistening with golden light and exuding an oppressive sense of wealth. When Korea saw this, his eyes lit up. In fact, with Atlantis's wealth, it was impossible for the treasury to not have 2 million gold coins. Even if they did not have it, they could slowly gather it at the bottom of the sea in 10,000 years. It was unknown how many shipwrecks were at the bottom of the vast sea, or how much wealth was buried with the shipwrecks in the depths of the seabed. No one cared about it. The Atlanteans had underwater breathing apparatus. As long as they were patient, they could probably flip through the entire Mediterranean Sea, including the Red Sea, in 10,000 years. Unfortunately, the gold coins of the natives were ineffective against the pool. Gaia's setting was purely to give players a difficult problem. If they chose side mission 2, not only would the participating players need to obtain an underwater breathing apparatus, they would also have to go through all sorts of trials to reach the land of survivors of Atlantis. Once they reached the land of survivors, they would have to constantly complete daily missions and farm Atlantis favorability points to obtain the permission to enter and exit the palace. Only then would the players be qualified to throw gold coins into the golden pool. Gaia's setting was firstly to increase the players' participation in the storyline missions, and secondly to use this opportunity to publicize the vanished Atlantean civilization. At the same time, it was a warning to future generations. After all, human civilization was a thing of the past to Earth. Perhaps their generation would be the 5th generation of humans on Earth. After tens of thousands of years, when Earth's magma eruption was over and it cooled down, it would once again be filled with vitality. When that time came, perhaps humans would once again appear on Earth and become the new rulers of Earth. When that time came, the traces they left on Earth would be seen by the new generation of humans as an ancient civilization. It would become a myth and legend that could not be verified. The golden trickle was endless, flowing without end. Ouyang Shua looked at the number of gold coins on the attribute panel. It kept increasing at an indiscernible speed, but he felt a rare sense of calm. No matter how he tried to persuade him to stay, 2 million gold coins had to be spent. In Friendship City, Ouyang Shua had spent 1 million gold coins. In Atlantis, he had spent another 2 million gold coins. As such, there was only 1 million gold coins left in his storage bag. It was as the saying goes, money comes quickly, but it is also quickly spent. Under the injection of massive amounts of gold coins, the golden liquid filled the pool at a speed visible to the naked eye. The water level kept rising, and waves of golden mist rose. The golden magnetite ore above the pool immediately activated its whale-swallowing mode. Like a high-powered suction fan, it sucked in large amounts of golden mist. The dim magnetite ore slowly emitted a dazzling luster, becoming more and more dazzling. The shield surrounding the golden magnetite ore seemed to be pulled by some mysterious force. The patterns on its surface began to light up as it constantly rotated around the magnetite ore. The further it went, the faster the shield rotated. Towards the end, Ouyang Shua could no longer see the shadow of the magnetite ore. All he could see was the increasingly dazzling golden light emitting from the center of the shield, shooting straight into the sky. Chapter 658. Just as Ouyang Shua was spending money like water, Zheng He's fleet encountered a huge problem. On the 26th of July, at the Strait of Gibraltar, Malaga City, the Spanish territory closest to the port of Gibraltar, took only one night to reach its destination. The mighty fleet, however, failed to find anything at the port. Looking at the empty port, the soldiers looked at each other in dismay. "Damn cowards!" The one who spoke was a black-bearded captain named Juan, who was also one of the most powerful lords in southern Spain. Juan led his troops to rush here overnight, hoping to seize the first merit and lead his troops in the first battle of the national war. How could he have expected such a situation to occur? Is he King messing with us? He initiated a national war and ran away before the war even started. Shameless. "Sir, what should we do now?" the first officer asked cautiously. Juan looked at the empty port, and a trace of slyness flashed in his eyes. He chuckled. "The enemy ran away, and I'm going to get the first merit in this national war. Everyone, charge into the port and recover the port of Gibraltar in one go." "Understood." The first officer snickered. Just like that, Juan went through hardships and killed the enemy bravely, and finally destroyed the Shanghai City fleet and recovered the port of Gibraltar. When the news spread to the Forum, the whole nation naturally rejoiced. The number one lord in the world? Haha, what a joke! The invincible fleet is invincible. The Forum was filled with unbridled mockery of the Shanghai City fleet and blind worship of the invincible Spanish fleet. Some players even spread the news internationally, attracting the attention of other countries in the Mediterranean Sea. The Shanghai City fleet occupied the port of Gibraltar? That can't be. Greece, Italy, and other countries had conducted trade with the fleet before, so they didn't believe it. Haha, the stupid Easterners are going to lose face this time. There were also people who were gloating. Arrogant Spaniards. There were also people who were dissatisfied with the Spaniard. The Spaniards considered themselves to be the masters of the Mediterranean Sea, so how could the other countries be happy? Throughout all the major battles of Shanghai City, they have never surrendered so easily. In my opinion, the fleet must have set up an ambush, waiting for the Spaniards to be humiliated. Agreed. The Spaniards' celebration was too hasty and short. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the ocean-going fleet set out. Zheng He adopted guerrilla tactics and attacked from all directions, either raiding or ambushing, causing a lot of trouble for the Spanish fleet. One after another, Spanish warships were sunk by the ocean-going fleet, causing the Spanish to gnash their teeth in hatred. The Spaniard felt that he had lost face and was even angrier. Among them, the most furious was naturally Lord Juan, who swore to destroy the ocean-going fleet. The Spaniards were not fools. After suffering a loss, they immediately changed their tactics and no longer acted alone. The unified Spanish fleet patrolled the Strait of Gibraltar in groups, continuously reducing the range of activities of the ocean-going fleet. As such, the situation of the ocean-going fleet suddenly became very difficult. Left with no choice, Zheng He could only gather the 4 naval battalions once again to prevent the Spanish fleet from destroying them one by one. In the end, he could only rely on his speed to contend with his opponent. The ruins of Atlantis, a place of survival. The golden light in the underground karst cave was getting brighter and brighter, and the golden liquid in the pool was about to fill up. The moment the pool was filled, the 12 shields protecting the golden magnetite ore suddenly dispersed, revealing the true body of the golden magnetite Oregon. It was as dazzling as a golden sun. Seeing this, Curia took a step forward, and the purple crystal hanging around her neck automatically floated up. She put her palms together and closed her eyes, as if she was communicating with the golden magnetite Oregon. Could it be that this stone actually has spirituality? Ouyang Shuo was bewildered. After a while, the golden magnetite ore shone brightly and suddenly burst open. The entire karst cave was filled with warm and dazzling golden light. It seemed to contain some kind of mysterious power that made people want to worship it. Even Curia was already prostrating on the ground. Ouyang Shuo's eyes narrowed, and he operated the inner cannon of the Yellow Emperor to forcibly resist the pressure. He was a lord, a marquis, and a hero of his generation. How could he worship a stone? As if feeling Ouyang Shuo's resistance, the golden light that enveloped Ouyang Shuo emitted an even stronger pressure, wanting to subdue Ouyang Shuo, this anomaly. Ouyang Shuo felt a tremendous force pressing down on his body from all directions. In particular, the pressure coming from the top of his head was getting stronger and stronger, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on him. Beads of sweat ceaselessly seeped out from Ouyang Shuo's forehead. Ouyang Shuo clenched his teeth tightly, and he used his absolute will to resist this pressure. However, the more he resisted, the more the golden light didn't intend to let him go. The pressure ceaselessly increased, and it pressed down on Ouyang Shuo to the point that the bones in his entire body were cracking. Ah! Ouyang Shuo clenched his teeth, and he couldn't bear it any longer. He suddenly sat down cross-legged, and the golden true essence circulated madly within his body. His meridians were similarly flickering with a golden light. His meridians that were continuously baptized by the dragon veins spirit chi on the nameless island were completely radiating with the toughness and vitality of a cockroach under this pressure. His boundless potential was swiftly transforming into actual strength. Under this pressure, the golden true essence within Ouyang Shua's body became more and more condensed, and more vigorous. The speed of his cultivation of the inner cannon of the Yellow Emperor was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ouyang Shua, however, didn't have a trace of happiness in his heart. Because the pressure from the golden light was still increasing, the bones in Ouyang Shua's body emitted a sound that was like frying beans, and it was extremely shocking. If he continued to resist like this, Ouyang Shua would definitely be squeezed into a ball of meat paste. Submit to me. Perhaps it was an illusion, but a wispy whisper seemed to enter Ouyang Shua's ears. Absolutely not. Ouyang Shua's eyes were crimson red, and his expression was ferocious. The dignity of a king can't be blasphemed. After the golden true essence, the fiend god bloodline within his body was completely mobilized by Ouyang Shua as well. Strands of the aura of the black god rose from within Ouyang Shua's body, and he attempted to use pressure to resist the golden light. The black bloodline and the golden true essence within Ouyang Shua's body reflected each other's brilliance. This was the first time that Ouyang Shua had mobilized two completely different types of energy within his body at the same time, and it was also the first time that these two energies fought side by side against a formidable enemy. Black and gold were so harmonious. It was even to the extent that the two of them started to move closer to each other and fuse with each other. If he was able to fuse these two energies together in one go, it would undoubtedly be an enormous fortuitous encounter for Ouyang Shua. Unfortunately, this fusion was extremely difficult. Sometimes they would gather together, and sometimes they would separate. If this continued, it would probably take more than a day. The golden light obviously didn't intend to give Ouyang Shua this time. Seeing that it still couldn't subdue this person, the golden magnetic stone was somewhat angry, and the pressure it exerted tripled. The sky and the earth were vast and boundless, as if there was no end to them. The sky was covered with golden clouds, but the earth was black as if it was cast from steel. Between heaven and earth, there was only Ouyang Shua alone. The golden clouds continued to press down, toppling the mountains and overturning the seas, and swallowing the mountains and rivers. Ouyang Shua's feet stepped on the earth, and his hands held up the sky as he let out an unyielding roar. The golden sky continued to press down, and Ouyang Shua's spine was bent from the pressure. However, the earth beneath his feet didn't move at all, allowing him to bear the pressure of heaven and earth alone. Ouyang Shua raised his head and looked around. All he saw was golden clouds all around him. The low and thick golden clouds made one feel suffocated, and it made one feel despair. It was as if there wasn't a trace of hope to escape. Cough! In an instant, Ouyang Shua suffered internal injuries. He coughed out a mouthful of fresh blood, and his face instantly turned deathly pale. Damn it! Ouyang Shua wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth, and his face was gloomy. He didn't expect that just when he was about to succeed, such an unforeseen event would occur. Could it be that Guya added an additional test for me because I completed the mission too easily? Ouyang Shua frowned. It was impossible for him to surrender. Even if he had to risk failing the mission and suffer the punishment of failure, he wouldn't allow himself to worship a stone. Queen Kalia was also a king, and the reason why he could worship a stone was because the magnetite stone was the totem of the Atlanteans. To Ouyang Shua, it was just a tool that provided him with energy. There's no other way. I can only give it one last try. Ouyang Shua calmed his mind and sank into his consciousness. He concentrated on connecting with the Dragon of Providence. At this moment, the only thing that could help him resist the pressure was the mysterious and unfathomable Dragon of Providence. In the sky above the seabed, amidst the clouds that stretched for thousands of miles, a giant dragon that was half red and half purple, that stretched for tens of miles, slowly opened its sleeping eyes. Its deep and serene gaze looked towards the depths of the seabed below the clouds. Roar! A dragon's roar sounded between heaven and earth. Immediately, a powerful dragon's might passed through thousands of miles of the void and descended on Ouyang Shua. Under this dragon's might, the golden light that enveloped Ouyang Shua instantly exploded. Phew! Ouyang Shua heaved a long sigh of relief. His sweat poured down like rain. The golden light retreated and wanted to condense again. At this moment, Kalia was awakened by the dragon's roar. When he saw Ouyang Shua's pale face, he immediately understood. Kalia was shocked. He put his palms together and communicated with the golden magnetite stone again. He didn't know what Kalia said, but the golden light enveloped Ouyang Shua again. The strange thing was that Ouyang Shua didn't feel the pressure anymore. The golden light seeped into Ouyang Shua's body. In an instant, his internal injuries were healed. It could even be said that his consumed true origin was immediately restored. When Ouyang Shua saw this, he stopped circulating the inner canon of the Yellow Dharch and the demonic god's bloodline. He woke up from his meditation and looked at the golden magnetite stone floating above the pool with a complicated expression. This time, it could be considered as a blessing in disguise. The problem was that Ouyang Shua didn't want to experience such a test again. After the interlude, the upheaval continued. The golden light pierced through the dome and rushed up to the clouds. Suddenly, the entire surviving area was shrouded in the golden light. Under the golden light, the surviving area became like heaven. At the same time, the magnetic magnetite stone hanging on the necks of every Atlantean emitted light at the same time. There were green, blue, and even purple. It was dazzling and colorful. Divine revelation. Like Kalia, all the Atlanteans knelt on the ground. Their expressions were devout and joyful. They felt that the opportunity for their race to rise again was right in front of them. The golden light didn't stop. It broke through the sky again, passing through the energy barrier that protected the surviving area and expanding rapidly. In less than 10 minutes, the entire ruins of Atlantis were shrouded in the golden light. Under the nourishment of the golden light, the mysterious carvings on the surface of the countless large and small buildings in the ruins came to life. The blue light formed mysterious patterns. Immediately, the corals and seaweeds attached to the surface of the buildings were annihilated. Even dust, mud, and all other unclean things were excluded from the ruins and no longer existed. The ruins of the entire city suddenly looked brand new. The sea god temple in the center of the city burst out a dazzling blue light, deep and blue. The sea god's statue suddenly became lifelike. Only the broken pillars and the statues that were missing arms and legs told of the tragedy that had befallen the city. The divine martial guards guarding outside the sea god temple were shocked when they saw this scene. Fortunately, Kalia seemed to have told them that the golden light didn't have any malicious intent toward them. It didn't even release any pressure. Deep under the sea, the dazzling golden light turned the blue sea into a golden sea. Suddenly, a rumbling sound came from deep under the sea. It was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The entire ruins were shaking, and it was getting more and more intense. All the golden light that filled the ruins suddenly converged toward the center of the city, gathered into a beam, and suddenly spread out, forming a huge golden ball that enveloped the entire ruins. At the same time, every Atlantean, including the divine martial guards, had a golden bubble appear around them, protecting them in the bubble. The shaking coming from deep under the ground was getting more and more intense. The land at the edge of the ruins continued to split apart, forming ghastly trenches. The trenches were getting wider and deeper. The cracks, which were dozens of meters wide, were a ghastly sight. Boom! A loud noise came from the deepest part of the sea, like a thunderclap. Creak! Then there was a strange sound like chopping bamboo. It was the sound of the roots of the ley line breaking. Just like that, the Atlantean ruins were finally separated from the bottom of the sea. After 10,000 years of evolution, the ruins had long been closely connected to the seabed continent. This break immediately caused a huge tsunami. The seawater was like a ferocious beast, pouring toward the roots of the ley line. A huge whirlpool with a diameter of more than 1,000 meters appeared on the surface of the sea. If a ship passed by at this time, it would definitely not be spared. The tsunami caused by deep under the ground was getting bigger and bigger, and the entire Strait of Gibraltar was affected. In the sea, whether it was the ocean fleet or the Spanish fleet, in the face of such a tsunami, they could only struggle like babies and no longer had the will to fight. Boom! Another earth-shattering noise. Atlantis, which had been silent for 10,000 years, was about to appear in front of the world again. Chapter 659. Under the golden light, the Atlantis ruins slowly rose up from the bottom of the ocean. The only thing that connected Atlantis City and the undersea continent was a 30-meter-thick pillar that supported the heavens. It looked a little unbelievable. The entire pillar was also covered in a golden light, and a mysterious power was added to it as it held up Atlantis City. If Ouyang Shua saw this, he would probably think about the legendary Jingu Bang. When the Atlantis ruins completely rose up from the ocean, it caused a huge tsunami. The entire Mediterranean Ocean region could feel this strong ripple. Along the Mediterranean Ocean, numerous merchant ships and fishing boats were unable to return to their ports in time and struggled bitterly in the huge wave. The nearby Gibraltar Ocean region had even more huge waves, each taller than the last. The tallest one was actually dozens of meters high. With the help of the wishes of the Mazu Temple and the Silver Prayer House, 2 Mengchong warships capsized. As for the Sima boats, they were kept into the turreted ships during the first wave. On Dragon Head, Zheng He looked out at the huge waves and gave out a bitter smile. He knew what the Lord had gone to do. He knew that the Lord was the one who caused this huge wave. It's really the Dragon King Temple, Zheng He exclaimed as he organized a search and rescue operation. Even the voyage squadron with the protection of the Mazu Temple was in trouble, much less the Spanish squadron. Based on incomplete calculations, there were at least 50 Spanish warships that capsized in the ocean. Some of the smaller warships were even split in half by the huge wave. Atlantis used such a domineering method to announce their strong return. Under the golden light, the ruins did not simply rise up from the bottom of the ocean. Instead, under the help of a mysterious power, it started to rearrange itself and form a complete Atlantis-style island. The new Atlantis Island was still a standard 3-story concentric circle design. At the center of the circle was the Ocean God Temple, which shone with a blue light. It was the only building in the area. The Ocean God was the core element of Atlantis, and its position was even higher than the royal family. Even the technology of Atlantis, like the flying devices and warships, were modeled after the giant beasts of the ocean. The Inner Circle Islands were the lucky survivors, and it was also the core of Atlantis. The palace, temple, research center, arts center, elder house, altar, and other core structures were all built in the Inner Circle. According to the rules, only Atlanteans who wore magnetic oolite stones of blue and above were qualified to step into the Inner Circle. For others, the Inner Circle was a forbidden zone. The Atlanteans who were able to hold on until now were undoubtedly lucky. The island in the middle circle was formed by the ruins of the cities deep in the sea. It was also the backbone of the Atlantis civilization. Technological factories such as aircraft, ordinary temples, residences, parks, and other buildings were all built in the center circle. The unique technological products of the Atlantis civilization were basically all set-up factories in the central circle. It could be said that the islands in the middle circle were the super factories of the Atlantis civilization. Although the ruins of the city were dilapidated, its construction materials were precious treasures. Every piece of stone was meticulously carved by the Atlanteans and could be repaired again. It was foreseeable that the restoration of the buildings in the center circle would be the Atlanteans' mission for a very long time in the future. The problem was that the 10,000 years of silence had caused the population of Atlantis to plummet, and the talents to wither. If he wanted to repair the center circle by himself, it would be an extremely long process. To the players, this was an opportunity. Ouyang Shu remembered that in his last life, Atlantis would crazily release a large number of quests to attract players to the center circle to help them repair the buildings. With the help of a large number of players, the restoration was completed in less than half a year, which could be considered a small miracle. The outer circle of islands was a new circle of islands that took up the largest area. It was a gift from the golden magnetic oolite to the Atlanteans, waiting for them to develop it. 10,000 years ago, the Atlantis civilization was a huge empire. They did not only have one such concentric circle islands but dozens of them. At their peak, there were even over 100 of them. Now there was only one left. Even though they had risen up, the glory of Atlantis was not there. What appeared in the Mediterranean was just the afterglow of the empire. Around the periphery of the island, there were 24 towering giants that were over 100 meters tall. The giants spread out their arms and formed a circle, guarding the island of Atlantis. The giants were unique to the Atlantis civilization, and they were known as the magnetic oolite magic-powered mechanical puppet. They could also be split into battle puppets and engineering puppets. On the surface and inside of the puppets were carvings, and they had complete mechanical circuit. They relied on magnetic oolite to move. The giants guarding the outer ring of the island were all combat golems. They were also the core strength of Atlantis. Unless it was a life-or-death situation, the Atlanteans would not use them. Every single one of these combat puppets possessed extraordinary battle prowess, capable of splitting mountains and splitting seas, possessing incomparable strength. If one had to compare, the octopus monster boss that Ouyang Shu had faced before was nothing in front of these puppets. Even if they were bombarded by cannons, they would not move at all. The only weakness of the battle puppets was that they used up a lot of energy. A blue magnetic oolite could only sustain them for an hour. After that, they would go into hibernation. When the magnetic oolite was fully charged, they could enter battle once more. Hence, the battle puppets were a trump card. In the modern era, they were strategic nuclear weapons. The battle puppets were strong, but the engineering puppets were not simple either. Each one was 4 to 5 meters tall, and there were even some that were 10 meters tall. Although in front of the battle puppets, the engineering puppets were like little brothers, compared to the construction workers, they were giant. When building the city walls, if he had the help of a dozen construction puppets, it would be a piece of cake for him to move large chunks of rock that had troubled countless craftsmen. It would be as easy as carrying a toy. Apart from building the city walls, temples, monuments, and the like, the construction puppets could also be used to load and unload goods at the docks, transport ores in the mines, and move large stones in the quarry. Even to say that the construction puppets had their own drill bits, which could be used to dig tunnels and other difficult jobs. In Atlantis, the construction puppets were widely used in various construction fields. Half of the credit for the construction of Atlantis was due to the construction puppet. Most importantly, the construction puppets had a really high endurance. The construction puppets would charge for a day, and on the third day, they could continue to work. Be it the battle puppets or the construction puppets, they were all extraordinary existences. The construction technology of the puppets was also the pinnacle of Atlantis technology, totally exceeding the technology trees of the various countries in the game. Between the 3 concentric circles of islands, there were 3 ring-shaped inland rivers of the same width. The water in the rivers was fresh water, and they were rich in fish. This was the foundation of Atlantis in the Mediterranean Ocean. In the rivers, there were many ships that looked like giant underwater beasts, shuttling back and forth. At first glance, there were whales, sharks, and large fish, and they were really eye-catching. These ships were called mimicry ships, and there were normal fishing and merchant ships, as well as warship. The warships were driven by magnetic oolite, and they were the backbone of the defense of Atlantis. One could say that Atlantis technology basically revolved around magnetic oolite. Along with the unique carving techniques of the Atlantis civilization, they formed a unique technological civilization. Even if other countries had the relevant technology, without magnetic oolite it was useless. Apart from the water between the concentric circles, there were also bridges between the islands. There was a bridge from east to west and north to south, crossing the 3 islands and forming a cross. At the end of the bridges were the 4 ports of Atlantis. For the Atlantis civilization to be able to form 4 ports in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, it was really amazing. Looking down from above, the entire Atlantis was really majestic and had a strong sense of technology. At this very moment, a regional notification sounded out throughout the Mediterranean countries. Mediterranean Region Notification. Congratulations to China Region Lord Chiuewui for completing the S-grade large-scale storyline quest, The Lost Atlantis. The Atlantis civilization has reappeared in the world, and they have established themselves in the Mediterranean region. The Atlantis civilization and related exploration quests are officially open to players. As for the specific situation, players can explore on their own. The moment the notification went out, the Mediterranean Ocean suddenly became silent. There was also a reasonable explanation for the sudden tsunami that affected the entire Mediterranean Sea. What? Atlantis? To the Mediterranean countries, Atlantis was definitely not a foreign term. However, they definitely did not expect that the legendary civilization would actually appear in the Mediterranean. Their first reaction was, "Where is Atlantis?" In the vast ocean, it was not easy to find an island. Some smart players thought about Chiuewui and the Gibraltar port conflict, and they immediately locked their eyes on the Gibraltar Strait. All the squadrons in the Mediterranean were shocked and rushed toward the Gibraltar Strait. The most awkward one was the Spanish squadron. They were still shedding blood for the country war and had even said that they would teach the Shanghai City Squadron a lesson. Now, all of a sudden, something like this happened. Thinking back to the dozens of warships that had capsized in the tsunami, they felt even worse. What a jerk! Juan's thoughts probably represented the thoughts of most of the Spanish people. The international forums were in an uproar. After all, only a small number of players could personally head out to search for Atlantis. As for those who could not go, they could only gossip about Atlantis on the forums. All of a sudden, all the rumors about Atlantis in real life were dug out by players. The more they understood, the more they were tempted. Some of the more impatient adventure game mode players chose to rent boats and head toward the Gibraltar Straits. Chapter 660. On the forum, the arrogant Spaniards were completely silenced. Lord Juan, who was greedy for fame and fortune, became a joke. Disappointing! The domestic players sighed. He didn't know how this baffling kingdom war was going to end. Atlantis Island, Inner Circle Palace. Ouyang Shua had already left the cave and returned to the surface of the palace with Kalia. As for the divine guards, they stayed on the island in the middle circle. Not long after the regional announcement ended, Ouyang Shua heard a system notification. System notification. Congratulations to player Don't Say You Have Clothes. You have completed the first side mission of the S-level large-scale storyline mission, The Disappearance of Atlantis. Reward. 1 top Atlantis technology, 1 purple crystal, 50,000 achievement points, 150,000 reputation points, and other rewards. The achievement points and reputation points were directly awarded. In this way, Ouyang Shua's 2 major attributes were close to the critical point of advancement. It could be said to be a great harvest. Including the achievement points obtained from the battle with the Spanish fleet, Ouyang Shua's total achievement points had reached 945,000 points. He still needed 55,000 points to be promoted to Duke. Even his reputation points had reached 820,000 points. He still needed 180,000 points to be promoted to the next level, which was also the highest level of reputation achievement, famous across the world. As soon as the system notification ended, Courier, who was at the side, spoke, "You're not without clothes. You're Atlantis benefactor." As he spoke, he took off the purple crystal hanging around his neck and handed it to Ouyang Shua. "This is for you." This, Ouyang Shua was a little hesitant. Although there was a purple crystal in the mission reward, he never thought it would be the one hanging around Kalia's neck. He knew that whether it was Kalia personally or the Atlantis race, this purple crystal must have an extraordinary significance. It was not comparable to an ordinary purple magnetite. "Please accept it. This is a token of our appreciation," Kalia insisted. Ouyang Shua sighed in his heart and reached out to take it. Earth on Lu had a high degree of freedom. Even the mission rewards were not the same. The NPCs in the storyline missions would flexibly give out rewards according to the mission process. Kalia's action was like this. She had a good impression of Ouyang Shua, so she gave the purple crystal that she personally wore to Ouyang Shua as a mission reward. Although they had not known each other for long, Ouyang Shua had left a deep impression on Kalia. To Ouyang Shua, Kalia was mysterious. But to Kalia, Ouyang Shua was even more mysterious. This fated person who had suddenly appeared had an extraordinary status, a calm demeanor, and a shocking amount of wealth. All of this was nothing to the Queen, Carly. What truly shocked Kalia was Ouyang Shua's unyielding will under the pressure of the golden magnetic Oregon. Kalia knew very well that Ouyang Shua was the first person in history who didn't kneel down under the pressure of the golden magnetic Oregon. Just this alone was enough to be recorded in the history of the Atlanteans. Ouyang Shua's unyielding gaze and unswerving expression had completely moved Kalia's heart. As the first queen of the Atlanteans, Courier admired this unyielding spirit the most. Kalia hoped to gain Ouyang Shua's personal friendship, and the two of them could have other interactions. Ouyang Shua took the purple crystal and looked at its properties. Name: magnetic ore, exclusive to the royal family. Level: purple. Origin: Atlantean civilization. Basic function: energy stone, can provide energy for specific items, can be recharged repeatedly. Advanced function: derivation, the purple magnetic ore can derive 1 blue magnetic ore, 2 green magnetic ore, and 4 white magnetic ore every month. Note: only the purple magnetic ore and the golden magnetic ore have the derivation function. Magnetic ores below the purple level cannot be derived. Advanced function: cultivation assistance, the purple magnetic ore has a mysterious energy. Long-term where can calm the mind, refine the purity of true yuan, speed up the progress of cultivation, and increase the concentration of true yuan. Exclusive function: fortune source, the purple magnetic ore exclusive to the royal family is specially blessed by the golden magnetic Oregon. When wearing it, the basic fortune source plus 4 points, and a certain probability of a fortuitous encounter. Evaluation: the golden magnetic ore is an extraterrestrial object that gave birth to the brilliant Atlantean civilization. If used reasonably, it will have endless wonderful uses. It is indeed a rare treasure. After looking at the properties, Ouyang Shua was speechless. The strength of the purple magnetic ore completely exceeded Ouyang Shua's strength. The basic attribute, energy stone, seemed inconspicuous, but it was a powerful weapon to drive magic puppets, mimic warships, and mimic aircraft. The advanced function, a derivation, was heaven-defying. Could it be that this is the legendary stone that gives birth to stone? Ouyang Shua thought to himself. In a year's time, 1 purple magnetic ore could give birth to 12 blue magnetic ores, 24 green magnetic ores, and 48 white magnetic ores. According to Kalia, the white magnetic ores did not have many uses. They were basically one-time consumables. They were mainly used by the Atlanteans for their daily cultivation, similar to the spirit stones in China. Of course, the white magnetic ore was not as powerful as the legendary spirit stones. One white magnetic ore was estimated to be equivalent to the result of an Atlantean's cultivation for an hour. The green magnetic ore was the mainstream magnetic ore. It was widely used in all kinds of high-tech products in Atlantis. Other than the combat magic puppets, the green magnetic ore could be driven by anything. The blue magnetic ore was already a rare item. Only the upper echelons could have it. As for the purple magnetic ore, other than the members of the royal family, only the elders of the Elder Council had the right to wear it. The purple magnetic ore could only be derived from the golden magnetic ore. It could only be produced once every 10 years. If that's the case, in 10,000 years, didn't you guys accumulate countless magnetic ore? Ouyang Shuo asked Kalia. When Kalia heard this, his expression became gloomy. There is no sunlight in the land of survival. The purple magnetic ore we have can't be charged at all, so it can't be derived at all. It can even be said that 99% of the magnetic ore of various grades that we accumulated before have automatically exploded and become useless because we can't be charged for a long time. The golden magnetic ore has to support the energy barrier, so it can't be derived from the purple magnetic ore. Ouyang Shuo was silent. No wonder Kalia was so desperate before. If no players appeared and completed the plot mission, the foundation of the Atlantean civilization would have been completely destroyed. Fortunately, we managed to survive, didn't we? Kalia was optimistic. That's why, Wui, you're our great benefactor. No matter how we repay you, it's never too much. Ouyang Shuo was speechless. In addition to a derivation, the high-level function of the purple magnetic or cultivation assistance was also very powerful. It could not only speed up the progress of cultivation, but it could also increase the concentration of true vitality. It was basically equivalent to an extremely rare cultivation treasure. It could be said that there was both an increase in quantity and a sharp change in quality. This kind of treasure was something that Ouyang Shuo had been searching for. He did not expect that it would lead to the purple magnetic ore. The last exclusive function, Fortune Source, was a pleasant surprise. Ouyang Shuo felt more and more that he was getting closer and closer to getting rid of his unlucky fate. Without saying anything, Ouyang Shuo directly hung the purple magnetic ore around his neck. When Kalia saw it, he smiled. Please follow me. Where to? Ouyang Shuo asked. In order to repay your kindness, we have decided to teach you a top technology of the Atlantean race. Apart from that, we will also give you some small gifts, Kalia explained. When Ouyang Shuo heard this, he could not help but feel his heart beat faster. Wasn't this the reason they spent 2 million gold coins? The two of them walked all the way and finally arrived at a loft in the Atlantis Research Center. The loft displayed all kinds of scientific and technological achievements of the Atlantis civilization. In addition to the magic puppets, warships, and flying machines, the Atlantis civilization also designed a complete lighting system, transportation system, and municipal system. Everything was the product of the combination of the magnetic ore and the carvings. To Ouyang Shuo, the magnetic ore was limited. Without the golden magnetic ore as an energy source, building a lighting system was just wishful thinking. The only thing Ouyang Shuo could do was to choose between the magic puppets, warships, and flying machines. Ouyang Shuo first eliminated the mimicry warship. Ouyang Shuo looked at the Atlantean mimicry warship. Other than the energy source, there was nothing special about the warship's structural design and weapon system. If the Shanghai City Navy wanted to dominate the sea, they would have to rely on the future steel warships and the more powerful cannon system. Only then would they be invincible. A small number of mimicry warships were simply insignificant. Between the magic puppets and the flying machines, Ouyang Shuo finally chose the flying machines. Of course, Ouyang Shuo coveted the combat and engineering magic puppet. Ouyang Shua eliminated the magic puppets because they were not irreplaceable in Shanghai City. No matter how powerful the combat puppets were, they could not be stronger than thousands of soldiers, ships, and cannons. Although using the combat puppets on the battlefield would be shocking, it was not enough to change the course of a large-scale war. Their cumbersome bodies and weak endurance made it easy for the enemy to target them. No matter how powerful the engineering magic puppets were, they could still be built with manpower and craftsmen. Shanghai City was a big city, and a few engineering magic puppets were not enough to change the layout of the buildings. They could only be icing on the cake. What was irreplaceable was the flying machines. In ancient times, it was wishful thinking to have an air force, even if it was only for reconnaissance purposes. 5 years ago in his previous life, a lord tried to train large raptors to form an aerial reconnaissance unit, and it was indeed successful. However, suitable raptors were hard to find, and there were not many of them. Whether or not they could be successfully formed depended on luck. The Atlantean mimicry flying machines were different. As long as they had the magnetic ore, there were no technical obstacles in forming a small aerial reconnaissance unit. Ouyang Shua's purple magnetic ore could make all of this possible. Chapter 661. After making his choice, Korea handed Ouyang Shua a thick booklet. Ouyang Shua took a look and saw that it was indeed the Atlantis Mimic Aircraft Manufacturing Technical Manual. After using it, he would automatically master the relevant manufacturing techniques of the aircraft. The minimum requirement for the magnetite for the aircraft was green grade. A green magnetite could support the aircraft for 6 hours, and a blue magnetite could support the aircraft for 12 hours. Since it was called an aircraft, its speed was incomparable to that of a real plane. According to the manual, the maximum speed of an aircraft was 200 kilometers per hour. A single green magnetite ore could only support a single aircraft flying across a county. If they really wanted to conduct long-distance aerial reconnaissance, they would have to build fixed airports in each county for the aircraft to take off and land and supply. In addition to forming an aerial reconnaissance team, the existence of the Atlantis Mimic Aircraft Manufacturing Technical Manual would also help improve the industrial strength of Shanghai City. Although it was the simplest aircraft that relied on magnetite and carvings to drive, its steelmaking level, fine processing of mechanical parts, and other technologies were all worthy of the No. 7 Research Institute's research. In modern society, aircraft manufacturing technology basically represented the industrial level of a country or region. The design and manufacturing of aircraft were related to materials, electronics, machinery, vehicles, energy, construction, and almost all other industrial sectors. It could drive the technological upgrading of a series of related industries. With the support of the manual, it would definitely help Shanghai City break through the bottleneck of the technology tree. Understanding the manual would be a comprehensive upgrade for Shanghai City's industry that was just starting out. Seeing that Ouyang Shua had finished reading, Korea handed over another booklet. This is for you too. Atlantis Navigation Technical Manual. After use, you will automatically master the relevant navigation technology accumulated by the Atlantis civilization. 10,000 years ago, the Atlantis Empire, which had not yet sunk, was itself a powerful maritime country. The navigation technology that the Atlanteans mastered was comparable to that of Europe in the 18th century. Therefore, the Navigation Technical Manual would be of great help to Shanghai City's maritime industry. In the future, Shanghai City would not be at a disadvantage in terms of navigation technology when it came to disputes with the Western maritime powers. Another additional reward. Korea was really generous to Ouyang Shua. After leaving the research center, it was time for Ouyang Shua to leave Atlantis. Accompanied by Korea, Ouyang Shua crossed the bridge and came to the Middle Circle Island to meet the Divine Guards. Looking from afar, there was a mountain of underwater breathing apparatus at the feet of the Divine Guards. In addition, there were a large number of miscellaneous items. Needless to say, these things were collected by the divine guards from the ruins under Ouyang Shua's instructions. There was a saying that went, like master, like servant. Although using it to describe the divine martial guard was somewhat inappropriate, in terms of sweeping, the divine martial guard and Ouyang Shua were of the same origin. If it was any other time, Ouyang Shua would definitely praise the divine guards. Now, Ouyang Shua glanced at Carly, who was at the side, and his face was filled with embarrassment. When Atlantis emerged from the sea, the items collected by the divine guards were no longer ownerless items. Strictly, it was not Yang Shua, but was. How could Ouyang Shua face the passionate Kaliao with such behavior? Seeing this, Kuria glanced at Ouyang Shua with a faint smile. Mion smiled. Big brother Wui, I was thinking of giving you some Atlantean products, but I didn't expect that you would be so lucky. It's all good now, I don't have to look for it. In a short period of time, Kuria changed the way he addressed Ouyang Shua. The greed of Ouyang Shua's subordinates made Kaliao have a deeper understanding of Ouyang Shua, and his mood suddenly became happy. It was as if this mysterious man had suddenly descended to the mortal world and become alive. How could Kuria not be excited about such an interesting discovery? Ouyang Shua smiled with ridicule, yet his skin was extremely thick, and he followed the excuse Kaliao gave him to naturally put all those things into his storage pouch. Not to mention anything else, this batch of underwater breathing apparatus was a rare treasure. Of course, Ouyang Shua wouldn't use the underwater breathing apparatus to search for underwater treasures. However, with underwater breathing apparatus as the core equipment, it was completely feasible to form a special frogman team for the Navy. In reality, frogmen were the Navy's special forces. They were responsible for underwater reconnaissance, demolition, and special combat missions. They were called frogmen because they were equipped with tools that looked like frog feet. The frogman team was very secretive and dangerous. It included reconnaissance in the enemy's rear area, destroying mobile launch devices, air defense facilities, water conservancy projects, and command posts. The frogman equipment included masks, fins, rubber jackets, oxygen tanks, and so on. In comparison, the underwater breathing apparatus produced by Atlantis was like a bug. No matter how advanced modern technology was, it was impossible to produce such light and powerful frogman equipment. As such, the Shanghai City Navy had gained another trump card. Atlantis Outer Circle Island, North Port. Finally, it was time to leave. In order to make it easier for the Divine Guards to meet up with the ocean fleet, Kuria gave them 2 Shark-class Mimic warship. In addition, there was also a Dolphin-class Mimic aircraft. As expected of the Queen of Atlantis, she was generous. Ouyang Shua let the Divine Guards ride the Mimic warship. He personally piloted the Mimic aircraft and rushed to the assembly point of the ocean fleet under Little Qing's guidance. Speaking of which, it was time to settle the score with Spain. On the morning of July 27th, Gibraltar Sea. When Ouyang Shua piloted the Mimic aircraft and slowly landed on the top deck of Dragon Head, one could imagine how shocked Zheng He and the other Navy officers were. If not for Little Qing's guidance, Zheng He would probably have ordered to fire. When Ouyang Shua walked out of the cockpit, the officers on the deck cheered enthusiastically. If not for the military discipline, they would have long been unable to resist and would have gone to see this strange machine. The officers and soldiers never dreamed that there would be a cumbersome monster that could fly like a bird in the world. I'm not dreaming, am I? A dumbfounded soldier pinched his thigh. How do you guys think this iron lump flew into the sky? The Marquis is so brave. He can even control such a monster. The appearance of the Mimic aircraft completely subverted the Navy officers' understanding of this world. Even the Navy Commander-in-Chief Zheng He's eyes flashed with shock and astonishment. Ouyang Shua smiled faintly. He didn't pay attention to the excited soldiers and directly called Zheng He to the war room. As soon as he sat down, he asked Zheng He to report the military situation. Tell me, what's the situation now? Zheng He didn't dare to delay and repeated the situation in detail. So, we are no longer able to deal with the Spanish fleet? Ouyang Shua frowned. Zheng He looked ashamed. I'm ashamed. I haven't thought of a way to defeat the enemy yet. Ouyang Shua waved his hand. He knew that the ocean-going fleet didn't have enough manpower after all. He couldn't blame Zheng He for this. However, Ouyang Shua wasn't satisfied if he didn't teach the Spanish fleet a good lesson. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little gloomy, Zheng He tactfully changed the topic. He cupped his fists and said, "The Marquis' trip has shocked everyone and stirred up the entire Mediterranean Sea. I'm impressed." Ouyang Shua nodded and briefly explained the Atlantis trip. Zheng He was amazed when he heard it. The mysterious Atlantis civilization was more shocking than he had imagined. May I be so bold as to ask, how many underwater breathing devices did the Marquis collect? Zheng He asked. Ouyang Shua didn't count. He sank his consciousness into the storage bag and roughly scanned. I'm afraid there are more than 10,000. He paused and said, "Why, do you have a new strategy?" Zheng He had always been a cautious person. He wouldn't even ask about things he wasn't sure of. I'm thinking if we can use the underwater breathing devices to arrange for a large number of sailors to infiltrate the enemy fleet and sink their warship. By then, won't they be at our mercy? Zheng He revealed his plan. Ouyang Shua's eyes lit up. It's possible, but the specific plan needs to be carefully discussed. This kind of surprise attack can't be done twice. Once the enemy is on guard, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to be effective. Understood. The two of them discussed for more than 2 hours in the war room. During this time, Ouyang Shua also called the Navy staff and other generals to discuss with him to ensure that there were no mistakes in the plan. That afternoon, the battle plan was officially implemented. The ocean-going fleet first sent out a large number of Scarlet Horse boats to investigate the specific location of the Spanish fleet. At the crucial moment, Ouyang Shua even personally piloted the mimic aircraft to investigate the sea. Even Little Qing was forcibly recruited by Ouyang Shua. After completely figuring out the location of the Spanish fleet, it was time for the Frogman Brigade, equipped with underwater breathing devices, to appear. They would take the Scarlet Horse boats and first arrive in the waters near the Spanish fleet. Then, they would dive to the bottom of the sea and secretly sneak under the enemy fleet. When night fell, they would carry out the operation of sinking the ship. The Frogman Brigade that Ouyang Shua had planned hurriedly appeared on the stage of history. At this time, the Frogman Brigade was just a group of sailors carrying simple tools. It was worlds apart from Ouyang Shua's imagination. The real Frogman Brigade could not only sink the ships, but they could also use it to board the enemy's ships and carry out decapitation operations. The more powerful ones could even sneak into the enemy's rear ports and carry out large-scale destruction operations. For the current Spanish fleet, this kind of Frogman Brigade was enough to make them suffer. No one would have thought that there would be people who could travel freely under the sea at this stage. Such a group of Spectre warriors would definitely launch a fatal blow to the Spanish fleet. At sunset, the ocean-going fleet once again split into 4 and advanced toward the 4 largest Spanish fleet group. They were ready to harvest the fruits of victory and send the Spanish invincible fleet to hell. Chapter 662. The Strait of Gibraltar was unusually quiet under the cover of night. Only the waves on the surface of the sea made a crashing sound. Whales and sharks leaped out of the sea from time to time, spitting out huge splashes. On the sea, Spanish galleons rose and fell with the wave. It was a spectacular sight. Spanish galleons were one of the most legendary galleons in history. As the epitome of Spain's maritime hegemony in the 16th and 17th centuries, they were often associated with treasures, pirates, conquerors, and invincible fleet. The typical characteristics of a galleon were a high chord, a high stern, a low front deck, a flat stern, and a protruding bow like the ram of a paddle boat, where there was an independent gun position. The hull was clearly equilateral trapezoid, and this slope extended all the way to the stern. The lines of the Spanish galleon were beautiful, and the stern was even more exquisite. The length-to-width ratio of the entire warship was 4:1, which gave it an advantage in speed compared to the carrack. The tonnage of the galleon reached 300 tons, which allowed it to provide a stable firing platform for cannons. At the same time, the towering ship also provided a fortress-like cover for the soldiers on board, giving it an advantage in close combat. Below the battery was the cargo hold, and above the ship were the passengers and soldiers. At this stage, only the large fortress ships made by Shanghai City could compare to it. After the tsunami, there was a disagreement within Spain as to whether or not to continue to encircle the Shanghai City fleet. Some people thought that since the port of Gibraltar had been recovered, they might as well give up. The most important thing at the moment was to find Atlantis and not let other countries beat them to it. Some people also thought that whether or not they could defeat the Shanghai City fleet had risen to a major event that concerned the reputation of the entire Spain. If the fleet was allowed to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, it would pose a huge impact and challenge to the dominance of the Spanish invincible fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. The lost glory can only be baptized by blood. So said the pro-war faction. The hegemony of the sea must be defended to the death. We can't give in even a single step. They clamored. It had to be said that such clamoring was very Spanish. In the entire European continent, perhaps there was no nation more fond of splendor, extravagance, and face than the Spanish. It was as if the entire Spanish nation's character was painted with strong red and black. It could be said that most of the extravagant and exaggerated things in European aristocratic society were added by the Spanish, including the famous hard collar, rapier, short pants, fencing jacket, lace, and so on. All of this had something to do with the romantic nights of Spain. Spanish literature world's greatest writer Cervantes, in his novel Don Quixote, through the protagonist Don Quixote, to this so-called knight, carried out a thorough irony. The magnificent chivalry of Spain had even continued into modern times. The famous Spanish bullfight was the best embodiment of such chivalry. In Spain and the entire Spanish-speaking world, bullfighters were regarded as brave and fearless men. They were respected and worshipped by the people, and their social status was extremely high. Gorgeous clothes, hot-blooded assassination, it was simply a copy of medieval knights. It was precisely because of this that the Spanish, who valued their reputation, could not tolerate the players from other countries in the Mediterranean Sea humiliating them on the forum. The pro-war faction completely gained the upper hand without much of an intense debate. The Spanish decided to go against the wind and defeat Shanghai City's ocean fleet in one fell swoop. This time, the Spanish coalition fleet covered almost all the main naval fleets of the Spanish coastal lord. Just the main warships alone, the Spanish galleons, numbered more than 600. In addition, there were a large number of Clark galleons as escorts. There were even a variety of miscellaneous sailboats sailed by adventure players alone, dotted in the coalition fleet. This time, Spain could be said to have turned out in full force. The coalition fleet was divided into 5 battle groups, forming a huge arc on the sea, echoing each other, and slowly approaching the ocean fleet under the command of the commander-in-chief of the fleet. If Ouyang Shuo did not come back in time, the ocean fleet might really suffer. And everything, on this seemingly ordinary night, was completely reversed. In the darkness of the night, with the sound of the waves hitting the warships, more than 4,000 frogmen, wearing underwater breathing devices, divided into 4 groups, came to the bottom of the Spanish warships, and began to cut the ships. Because they were afraid that the sound of cutting the ships would alarm the Spanish on the ships, the frogmen moved very slowly and had to accurately follow the rhythm of the waves, breaking one by one. At this time, the Spanish warships had already adopted advanced watertight compartment technology. Therefore, the frogmen needed to cut at least 2 cabins at the bottom of the ships to ensure that the warships would sink. As a result, their workload was greatly increased. It was not that Ouyang Shuo did not think of simply sending 10,000 frogmen, but it was difficult to achieve. First, the Scarlet Horse boat's transport capacity was limited, and frequently arriving at the enemy fleet would be easily detected by the Spanish fleet. Second, while it was easier to get things done with more people, it also greatly increased the chances of exposure and mistakes. Once the Spanish fleet noticed their actions, the effect would be greatly reduced. Therefore, after overall consideration, Ouyang Shuo and Zheng, he finally chose 4,000 capable soldiers. When the sun rose from the sea again, the thrilling night was finally over. The 4,000 frogmen successfully completed their mission and quietly left the bottom of the sea. And just 20 miles away from the Spanish fleet, the ocean fleet of Shanghai City slowly approached, like the emissaries of the god of death. The morning sun was especially red. The red was bewitching, so red that it made people panic. The first afterglow of the morning sun across the sky dyed the sea blood red. After a night, the bottom of the Spanish warships was flooded with water and began to slowly sink. When the sailors entered the cabins for routine inspection, they were dumbfounded by the water that filled the cabins. Oh God! The sailors were at a loss. Almost at the same time, the major fleets sounded the alarm. On the flagship of the first battle group of the Spanish coalition fleet in the middle, an old general, who was bald and had a white curly beard and was wearing Spanish plate armor, walked out of the cabin. The old general was dressed in a typical Spanish aristocratic style, with a hard collar, a thin sword, and short pants. He was not missing any of the standard Spanish aristocratic attire. Whether it was the few strands of hair on the top of his head or his thick beard, they were all carefully groomed and meticulously groomed. Obviously, this was a typical Spanish aristocrat. The old general's name was Alvaro de Bazan, the first Marquis of Santa Cruz. He was called the Father of Soldiers by the Spanish soldiers, and he was the most capable naval general in Spain. When mentioning the Marquis of Santa Cruz, one had to mention the most glorious period in Spanish history, and the most powerful king in Spanish history, Philip II. Philip II was the son of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. After Charles V announced his abdication, he inherited the Habsburg Empire, except for Austria and Germany, where the family originated. Charles V's younger brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I, inherited the title of Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the highest position in Germany in name but not in reality. As for Spain and the Netherlands, the source of the Habsburg dynasty's military and economic power, they belonged to Philip II. This also laid a solid foundation for the rise of Philip II. It was during the reign of Philip II that Spain ushered in the most powerful era in its history. During this period, Spain even forcibly annexed its neighbor, Portugal. Spain's status as a maritime power was established during this period. Under the rule of Philip II, Spain's national strength reached its peak. Historians called this period the Habsburg dynasty, which dominated the whole of Europe. Philip II had several naval generals under his command, including the Spanish god of war, Duke Fernando of Alva, known as the Bloody Butcher, Philip II's half-brother Don Juan Alvaro, Marquis of Santa Cruz, and Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma. The white-bearded old general, Alvaro, who appeared on the deck, was the Marquis of Santa Cruz under Philip II in history. It was he who led his troops to capture Portugal. In 1583, in the Battle of San Miguel, Alvaro led his troops to defeat the French fleet commanded by Elma de Chateau and executed all the prisoners of war. After the war, Alvaro became the commander-in-chief of the Spanish fleet. In 1585, the Marquis of Santa Cruz suggested sending a naval expedition to invade England. Unfortunately, before the expedition was ready, the Marquis of Santa Cruz died on February 9, 1588. The death of the Marquis of Santa Cruz marked the decline of the Spanish invincible fleet. The Marquis of Santa Cruz was the only historical general to appear in the wilderness of Spain. The other naval generals were either not born yet, or they followed Philip II and lived in the Palace of Madrid, the capital of Spain, and were not subdued by the players. Therefore, Alvaro was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Spanish combined fleet without any dispute. What happened? The old general's eyes were sharp, and he was not angry. "Commander, our warship is leaking, and it is slowly sinking." The first officer looked flustered. "Why is it leaking? Can it be plugged? How many warships are leaking? What about the other formations?" Alvaro's heart suddenly jumped, and he asked a series of questions. Looking at the red sun in the distant sky, Alvaro frowned, and his heart became more and more uneasy. Reporting to Commander, after investigation, the leak is because the bottom of the cabin was cut open. There is too much water, and the hole is too big. It is difficult to plug it again. And it is not just one warship that is leaking, almost every warship is leaking. The situation of the other formations has not been reported to the headquarters. The first officer's face was pale. Chapter 663. Even with Alvaro's composure, he could not help but shudder when he heard the first mate's report. He could not imagine how the enemy had destroyed all the warships in a single night without them noticing. "There's no need to wait. Pass down the order. Abandon the warships and leave this place on the small boat." As expected of a veteran, Alvaro acted decisively and without any hesitation. "Yes, sir." The first mate performed a military salute before turning around and leaving. Alvaro stood tall and straight on the bow of the warship, his furrowed brows still furrowed. The enemy definitely has a backup plan after setting up such a vicious scheme. He had only ordered the escape on the small boats because he was hoping for a fluke. Alvaro, who had spent his entire life on the battlefield, knew full well that this was often the case on the battlefield. The more you hoped for a fluke, the more likely it would happen. Considering the worst-case scenario had long since become the instinct of a general on the battlefield. The problem was, there was no other path of retreat in the vast sea. Alvaro's deep gaze seemed to be able to see the bloody scene of the battlefield. 10 minutes later, thousands of spare small boats were lowered from the warship, and the sailors hurriedly transported the necessities of survival onto the small boats. The NPC army was bound by military discipline, so most of them could still maintain their calm. Under the command of their respective commanding officers, teams of players boarded the small boats in an orderly manner. However, the adventurer players were different. With so many people, it was inevitable that there would be crowding and queue jumping. Those with even the slightest bit of navigational knowledge knew that the emergency boats on the warship were not enough to accommodate all the crew members. Not to mention, some of the small boats also had to carry supplies. Thus, no matter how much people squeezed, there would still be some who could not board the small boat. Those who boarded the small boats had a chance of survival, but those who did not would not escape death. In the face of the threat of death, very few people could remain calm. Compared to the NPC army, the adventurer players valued their lives even more. Every reincarnation was equivalent to returning to their original state. The further they went, the more chaotic the situation became. Seeing the small boats being filled one after another, the people still on the deck could no longer remain calm. Shoving, shouting, and even fighting took place on the warship. Aside from the adventurer players, even the sailors on the ships panicked. They no longer had the mood to work, and they all joined in the fight for the small boat. The scene was chaotic. "Scram, you lowly commoners!" Amidst the clamor, this shout was still very ear-piercing. On a large Spanish ship to the left, a young adventurer player with a cold expression stabbed a middle-aged sailor in front of him with a thin sword, killing him on the spot. Fresh blood flowed all over the deck, and it was exceptionally glaring. The young man pulled out his Spanish rapier and carelessly wiped it on the sailor's corpse before sheathing it. When the surrounding sailors saw this scene, their eyes flashed with anger and fear. There was a commotion in the crowd. Seeing that the other sailors were looking at him, the cold-looking young man did not think that he had done anything wrong. Instead, he shouted, "What are you looking at? What right do you lowly commoners have to be in front of us?" It had to be said that since the beginning of the game, there were still many players who did not treat NPCs as humans. In their eyes, these NPCs were nothing more than a bunch of data. So what if they were killed? In front of NPC sailors, players felt that they were a cut above others. Therefore, not only did the other players not condemn the cold-looking young man's actions, they even followed his example. If it was light, they would push the sailors in front of them away. If it was heavy, they would directly clash with their weapons. Even if there were players who did not approve of it, they would only silently make a fortune and would not step forward to stop it. How could these sailors be a match for the adventurer players? Not to mention them, even the NPC soldiers were no match for the adventurer players in terms of individual combat power. With the connivance of some people, in less than 10 minutes, more than 20 sailors fell into pools of blood, and there were countless heavily injured people. The crowded queue immediately became much more relaxed. Such behavior finally provoked the public's anger. Sailors were also human, and in moments of life and death, they would also explode with extraordinary strength. "Brothers, fight them to the death." A man raised the club in his hand. "Fight them to the death. If they don't give us a way out, don't even think about leaving alive. At most, we'll die together." If they could not board the ship, they would die. Since that was the case, why would the sailors be afraid of fighting the players? Thus, the chaotic battle on the deck began. The players and the sailors fought. Although the sailors suffered heavy casualties, it was inevitable that some players would be killed by the sailors in the chaos of battle. This further aroused the hostility in the hearts of the players. Early in the morning, the huge sense of defeat had already made them breathless. Now, even this group of lowly commoners dared to resist. How could the players not be angry? Some of the players who were originally hesitant joined the battle one after another. As a result, the sailors suffered heavy casualties. The small-scale disturbance gradually evolved into a large-scale internal strife. In fact, there was even an embarrassing confrontation between the players who had already boarded the ship and the sailors. The two groups were completely divided. Even the NPC soldiers had a flash of anger in their eyes when they saw their compatriots being slaughtered. If not for the officers coming forward to suppress the situation, it would probably have escalated into an even greater internal conflict. When Alvaro received the news, his beard trembled in anger. At a time like this, these Inhumans were still so unscrupulous. They were truly unreasonable and despicable. "Tell those bastards to stop, or don't blame me for being rude." Alvaro's expression was gloomy. "Understood." The first mate retreated with a troubled expression. The Alliance Fleet Command had almost zero restrictions on the players. The adventurer players were all voluntary. Now, the only ones who could restrain these players were the Overlord players and the guild leaders. The Overlord players were also very dissatisfied with this farce. Those sailors were their subjects, not cabbages. How could they not be angry when the guild players harvested their lives just like that? At this moment, a big bearded player suddenly stood up and shouted, "Brats, stop when you've had enough. Don't go too far." Under the effect of his vigorous chi, a loud voice spread throughout the entire sea. Strangely enough, with just this shout, most of the players wisely stopped and quickly left the battlefield. The sailors who were beaten up naturally did not have the courage to continue. They silently retreated to the side and licked their wounds. This was because the big bearded player was none other than the leader of the Madrid mercenary group, the #1 guild in Spain. He was also the #1 expert in Spain, Pepe. Among the Spanish adventurer players, Pepe's prestige was still very high. Most of the players were willing to give Pepe face and stop. Because of Pepe's appearance, The whole matter was settled just like that. As time passed, the cabin was flooded faster and faster. The large sailboats continued to sink, and the speed of their sinking was clearly accelerating. Whirlpools had begun to form on the surface of the sea. "Quick, retreat immediately, don't care about the supplies." Alvaro jumped onto a small boat and gave an urgent military order. "Retreat, the whirlpools are about to form." "Quick, hurry up and row faster." There was no need for Alvaro's reminder. More than 1,500 small boats of the first battle group had already begun to flee in panic. Any sailor with a little common sense knew what a disaster it would be for the small boats once the whirlpools were completely formed. On the vast surface of the sea, such a spectacle appeared. One by one, the large sailboats quickly sank to the bottom of the sea like behemoths that had fallen into a swamp. First the hulls, then the decks, and finally even the masts and exquisite sails disappeared from the sea. Along with them disappeared the glory of the Spanish invincible fleet. Water whirlpools formed one after another on the surface of the sea, strung together like rainwater falling into a pond and creating ripples. However, these ripples were unusually large and dangerous. The densely packed small boats crowded around the periphery of the whirlpools were so terrified and helpless. The players on the small boats were filled with despair. Last night they were still thinking about defeating the ocean-going fleet and defending the glory of the country. When they woke up, they were already stray dogs. The huge drop, the heavy blow, made the proud Spaniards numb. Even a meritorious general like Alvaro could not inspire the morale of the soldiers. Half an hour later, the battle reports of the other battle groups were reported to the shabby headquarters. Spanish maritime communication used a kind of white seagull to deliver letters. Therefore, even after such a huge change, the communication between the battle groups could still be unimpeded. Reading the report, Alvaro's mood sank to the bottom. Not only the first battle group, but the second, third, and fourth battle groups were also experiencing the same scene. Only the fifth battle group, as the reserve team, was temporarily spared. The fifth battle group was only the reserve team. There were less than 20 Spanish large sailboats, the rest were Carrack large sailboats and miscellaneous sailboats. Before the battle, Alvaro had never thought of joining the fifth battle group. Now, the fifth battle group seemed to be the only hope of the entire invincible fleet. The four battle groups, a total of more than 6,000 small boats, under Alvaro's unified command, gathered majestically toward the fifth battle group, seeking shelter. Such small boats could be completely overturned by a slight tsunami. "I hope we can send these boys back safely," Alvaro sighed. It was not that Alvaro did not know that there might be something fishy about the fifth battle group surviving. It was just that he had no other choice. This kind of stifling battle made him feel very helpless. It was like the enemy had set up a heavy trap. You knew it was a trap, but you had no choice but to fall into it. It was only because in the heavy trap, there was bait left to give people hope. This was the brilliance of the Shanghai City Fleet's strategy. In Zheng He's words, the fifth battle group is a bait, gathering all the Spanish fleet together and then capturing them in one fell swoop. Chapter 664. At around 10 in the morning, the Navy that was in charge of monitoring the four Spanish battle groups sent messages one by one, saying that there were no small boats taking the opportunity to leave the main force. Most of the small boats of the enemy were gathering at the fifth battle group according to the script set by Shanghai City. Zheng He heaved a long sigh of relief when he received the news. Of course, he could not count on the enemy to gather at the fifth battle group. In order to prevent accidents, he arranged for the Navy to monitor the outside. If there were any smart people who wanted to leave the main force and escape during the chaos, they would be intercepted by the Navy. The entire plan could be said to be watertight. Pass down the order. All units gather and prepare to close the net. Yes, sir. The hummingbirds of the Military Intelligence Department were not safe to communicate on the sea. A gust of wind could blow these little guys away. Communication on the ocean was also completed with the help of domesticated seagulls. Ouyang Shuo returned from Atlantis with a new communication tool. It was the communication conch. The Atlanteans carved magical carvings on the normal conch and permanently embedded a green magnetite in the conch. It could be used as a short-distance communication tool on the sea. Within a range of 1,000 nautical miles, messages could be clearly transmitted. Unfortunately, the communication conch could only be used on the sea. If it was on land, it could only be used within a range of 10 kilometers. The effect was greatly reduced. Otherwise, in the wilderness where communication channels were blocked, the communication conch would definitely be a great weapon. Among the treasures collected by the Divine Martial Guards, there were hundreds of such communication conches. Ouyang Shuo kept 2 and prepared to give them to Bing when he returned. He was sure that the little girl would like such a fun gift. Ouyang Shuo gave the remaining communication conches to Jing He. Once the order was given, the 4 naval battalions quickly advanced. At this time, the Spanish fleet was under the protection of the 5th Battle Group, trembling as it sailed towards land. Around the 20 Spanish large ships were densely packed with more than 6,000 small boats. It was a spectacular sight. At this time, a roar came from the sky above the fleet. The players looked up and saw a dolphin-shaped aircraft circling in the sky. What is that? A dolphin or a plane? The players were dumbfounded. Oh my God! Do you guys think that is an enemy reconnaissance plane? Someone asked uncertainly. Reconnaissance plane? Are you kidding me? The backward eastern countries? There were also people who didn't believe it. The backward easterners are still using heavy cannons. How could they have made airplanes? Cough. Someone reminded him, don't forget, not wearing anything completed the Lost Atlantis storyline mission. Just because the Easterners can't build aircraft doesn't mean that the Atlanteans can't. The surrounding players were instantly silenced. Who cares? The other party is definitely up to no good. Use the cannons to blast them down. Pep said. That's right. Blast him to death. Let's see if he can still be so arrogant. Someone echoed. The Lord player next to them looked at the 2 combat players as if they were idiots. What's wrong? Pep was very unhappy and urged, hurry up and give the order to fire. One of the older lords couldn't stand it anymore. He put his hand to his forehead and wailed, Brother, do you think this is the real world? The cannons in the game don't have the ability to hit a plane that's hundreds of meters high. In the real world, it was not until the early 20th century that the first anti-aircraft cannon was born. Trying to use the artillery of the 16th century to hit a plane? It probably wouldn't even be able to shoot down a balloon. How do you know if you don't try? Pep was stubborn and liked to do things in a one-track mind. Then let's try it so that you'll give up. The Lord who had just replied was easy to talk to. Fire! At the command, the cannons all fired. The result was, of course, futile. The Spanish artillery of the 16th century still used live ammunition. The cannonball shot out and soared into the air. It flew less than 200 meters high before drawing a parabola and falling downward. Looking at the direction, it was going to fall into the surrounding group of small boat. Hurry up and get out of the way! Someone exclaimed. F***CK. Someone cursed. It was too late. The cannonball fell into the group of small boats at an alarming speed and exploded a big hole. In an instant, 3 small boats were completely destroyed and nearly 100 people were killed. The Spanish players wanted to cry but had no tears. Even Pep was a little embarrassed. Who the F***CK gave the order to fire? I'm not done with you. The surviving players below cursed. Damn, they were almost scared out of their wit. Forget it. Let's follow. The Spanish players had completely given up. In the sky above the fleet, Ouyang Shuo sat in the cockpit of the pseudo-aircraft. He could not help but laugh when he saw the enemy's cannonball falling into his position. The Spanish are really creative. Ouyang Shua took out a communication conch and issued an assembly order. Everyone, hurry to the designated coordinates immediately. The target is already in position. At 11 in the morning, under Ouyang Shua's personal command, the ocean-going fleet finally caught up with the Spanish fleet. They formed an airtight encirclement and trapped the other party. In the distant sky, a golden dragon flag appeared. It was even more dazzling against the sunlight. It's the ocean-going fleet of Shanghai City. The players exclaimed. Everything had been revealed. The soldiers' eyes were filled with despair. The scorching sun was in the sky, shining brightly. However, the Spanish soldiers felt a chill in their hearts. The invincible fleet is finished. Alvaro closed his eyes, as if he could not bear to see the tragedy that was about to happen. What's there to be afraid of? We still have more than 20 large ships. At most, we'll fight it out with them. Pep was a complete warmonger. He did not know what fear was at all. How do we fight it out? They can overturn all the small ships around us with a single round of cannons. But we can't just sit and wait for death. Pep was indignant. Killing one is one. That's right. The Spanish are not cowards. We will fight to the end. In this desperate situation, the proud Spanish did not disgrace the glory of their ancestors. After all, they still had some backbone. Just when the Spanish decided to fight to the end, Ouyang Shua's voice came from above. Players below, listen up. You have been surrounded. Don't struggle in vain. Otherwise, don't blame us for killing you. Shanghai City has no intention of fighting to the end with your country. I believe you all know why this war started. Shanghai City has no intention of fighting in the Mediterranean Sea, but we will not allow others to trample on our dignity. From now on, as long as you leave the warship and surrender immediately, Shanghai City will allow you to redeem your lives with gold coins. The Spanish players looked at each other in dismay. Humans were like this. When they were really at a dead end, they would definitely fight with their lives. Suddenly hearing that there was a chance of survival, their determination immediately dissipated. Even Pep, who was the most belligerent, was somewhat silent. Pep had a substitute doll with him, so he was naturally unafraid of death. However, as the team leader, he had to consider the lives of his subordinate. Pep circulated his battle chi and asked loudly, "The one above is Marquis Lianzhou, right? Tell me, how do you propose the ransom?" Every player, regardless of level, identity, or status, will have a ransom of 200 gold coins. However, Ouyang Shua did not have the energy to distinguish between ordinary players, lords, or guild leaders. If this was before Gaia introduced the achievement point redemption time limit, such a ransom was probably unbearable for ordinary players. But now, if they clenched their teeth, they could afford it. In comparison, a ransom of 200 gold coins was much more cost-effective than reincarnation. What do you think? Pep asked the other bigwigs. I think it's doable. Isn't there an old saying in China? Where there's life, there's hope. Shanghai City is exploiting us today, but one day we will get back double. This person was also an expert in China. Well said. Ask what about the native army? Can they also use gold coins to redeem their lives? A lord player asked. Pep nodded and looked up to ask Ouyang Shua, how about the native army? How much gold coins per person? In my eyes, they are all treated equally. They are all 200 gold coins per person, Ouyang Shua said slowly. That's too much. Some lords expressed their dissatisfaction on the spot. The loss of players reincarnating was huge, so they could bear with the ransom of 200 gold coins per person. But the NPC army? What a joke. Nurturing a soldier would not exceed 50 gold coins. Ouyang Shua smiled when he saw this. In fact, he had no intention of letting the Spanish NPC army return in one piece. If that happened, wouldn't it be releasing a tiger back into the mountains? He liked money, but he was not someone who did not know what was important. Ouyang Shua did not release the Spanish players because he was greedy for the ransom. Shanghai City wanted to open up the ocean trade, so it was impossible for them to really fall out with Spain. If they really killed all the Spanish players, there would probably be no room for negotiation. Not to mention whether Shanghai City had the strength to take down Spain. Even if they could, it was impossible. Once a full-scale war broke out, it was obvious that not only the Mediterranean countries, but the entire Europe would also move. On this point, Europe was extremely united, and they definitely would not allow outsiders to invade the continent. Thus, when dealing with the Spanish issue, Ouyang Shua had to think carefully. Everything that Shanghai City did had to be reasonable, so that the other European countries could not find fault with it. Marquis Lianzhou, is there no room for discussion? Pep asked. No. Ouyang Shua's attitude was resolute. Those who are willing to pay the ransom, drive the boat north to trade. Those who are not willing, stay where you are. If you are willing to submit to Shanghai City, I will welcome you. The Spanish players were speechless. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually dared to poach the Spanish players in public. When the native soldiers and sailors heard this, their eyes flashed, and their expressions changed. Pep smiled bitterly. Everyone, this is the situation. Make your own decisions. Chapter 665. Ouyang Shua's words caused the atmosphere in the Spanish fleet to suddenly become strange. The Spanish overlord players noticed that the soldiers under their command were looking at them strangely. If they were forced to rush forward and fight with the enemy, it would immediately cause a mutiny. Even the adventure-type players felt a little uneasy. After all, during the evacuation of the large sailboat, the players and the sailors had a fierce, bloody conflict. The relationship between the two sides had long been like a taut string that could break at any moment. Now that they had the support of Shanghai City, who knew what crazy things these natives would do? Cough, everyone, hurry up and pay the ransom and leave. I don't want to stay in this damn place for another moment. Pep glanced at the overlord players with a faint hint of warning. Forget it, so be it. Seeing this, the overlord players had no choice but to compromise with a bitter expression. Just like that, another spectacle appeared on the sea. The ocean-going fleet specially set up a toll station in the north. No matter who sat on the boat, players or NPCs, all small boats that passed through would be charged 200 gold coins per person. When it came to the Navy Admiral Alvaro, they were stopped. What, you want to go back on your word? The accompanying overlord's face was gloomy, and his tone was somewhat unfriendly. In this war, the overlord players suffered the most. Not only did they lose the battleships and cannons that the territory had spent a lot of money to build, but even the army under their command had to reluctantly give up because of the ransom. They only took a small number of elite soldiers, and the rest of the army was given to the enemy for nothing. This was really hard to swallow, but in the face of the general situation, they had to bow their heads. If they really fought, the first to disagree would probably be the adventure-type players. The overlord who spoke was called Casillas, the second-ranked overlord in Spain, and also the most powerful overlord along the coast. The Navy Admiral Alvaro was his general. Others can pass, but not this old general, the guard said as he pointed at Alvaro. Why? The Marquis said that he wants to invite the old general to the ocean-going fleet as a guest. Don't go too far. Casillas was furious when he heard this. Even a fool would not believe such a ridiculous reason like inviting him to be a guest. Shanghai City was obviously envious of Alvaro and wanted to detain him by force. This is the Marquis's decree. We are just following orders. The guard was unmoved. You. Casillas was so angry that he laughed. Fine, let Marquis Lianzhou talk to me. The Marquis is not seeing guests for the time being. The guard was still as stiff as ever. The situation was in a stalemate. The guards neither let him pass nor forcefully snatch him away. In the face of Casillas's roar, they even turned a deaf ear to it. Just like a steel guard, they stood still despite the wind and rain. As such, the players at the back of the queue could only wait. After a long time, they became unhappy. Since he couldn't see Ouyang Shua, the players could only persuade Cassius to take a step back. Forget it. It has already come to this. What's the point of arguing? He's just a guest. Maybe he'll be back in a few days. That's right. Don't reject his kind invitation. To be honest, this kind of persuasion was as fake as it could be. The behavior of the Spanish players was just like an old saying in China, a dead friend is better than a poor friend. The players now only wanted to escape from this place. As for the loss of others, why would they care about it? They would only resent Cassius for being unreasonable and create waves. Gossip was a fearful thing, and the emotions of the world were like blades. It was not just talk. Cassius's face was flushed and he gritted his teeth. With his self-restraint, he was about to explode. Alvaro was the first admiral of the Spanish Navy and the trump card of the estate. How could he easily give up? The longer the time dragged, the more agitated the players became. In the end, not only the ordinary players, but even the guild leaders began to come forward to persuade Cassius. Forget it. We lost this time. We can only let ourselves be trampled on. Yeah, there's an old saying in China, a little impatience will spoil great plans. It was that China expert again. The other party is determined to keep the commander. There won't be any result if this confrontation continues. In case the other party runs out of patience and forces us to stay, then we'll be in big trouble. The words of kind persuasion were like a knife stabbing Cassius's chest, making him want to vomit blood. Shameless, shameless. Cassius's hatred for these compatriots even exceeded his hatred for Ouyang Shua, who was the most hateful person in the world. They didn't know what you experienced, didn't know what you suffered, and what unfair treatment you received. They just kept persuading you, be magnanimous. Magnanimous your ass. In reality, this kind of person would be struck by lightning. Cassius was facing a group of such people. He wanted to resist to the end and simply break up and drag this group of abominable guys to hell together. Unfortunately, he was a rational person after all. As a lord, Cassius was always vigilant of himself not to be impulsive, let alone emotional. If he really offended this group of players, the future situation of his estate in Spain could be imagined. He was bound to suffer this loss. Marquilienjo, I'm not done with you. Cassius said the harsh words and left without looking back. The protagonist of the incident, Alvaro, did not say a word from beginning to end. It seemed that no one thought that they should ask Alvaro what he thought. Seeing the lord turn around and leave angrily, Alvaro sighed softly and went to Dragon Head under the respectful guidance of the guards. The scene was restored to order. It was not until 2 o'clock in the afternoon that those who should leave were gone. In the end, a total of more than 30,000 players and more than 4,000 NPC soldiers paid the ransom. The total amount of ransom received by Ouyang Shua reached a terrifying 7 million gold coins. There was no doubt that this was the largest war wealth in the history of Shanghai City. The 2 million gold coins spent in Atlantis was no longer painful for Ouyang Shua. The net profit was 5 million gold coins. Ouyang Shua calculated the funds in his storage bag and found that he had become the richest man in the world. There were originally 1 million gold coins left in the storage bag. Adding the 7 million gold coins, there was a total of 8 million gold coins. In addition, there was still a sum of money, which was the trade income. Before going out to sea, Shanghai City purchased more than 500,000 gold coins worth of various materials and replenished a batch of pepper and spices in Star State County. By the time they passed the Mediterranean Sea, these goods were basically sold out. The overall profit had increased by about 6 times, and the trade volume was roughly 3.5 million gold coins. Among them, the purchase of green stones and other goods from the West had cost 500,000 gold coins. After calculating, there were 3 million gold coins left. In other words, there were a total of 11 million gold coins in Ouyang Shua's storage bag. No one would believe it if they set it out. What was more terrifying was that Ouyang Shua's journey of earning money was far from over. It was really unknown to what extent Ouyang Shua's wealth would be accumulated by the end of the voyage. It was no wonder that people said that the voyage was a crazy journey of plundering global wealth. In history, when Spain was at its strongest, thousands of Spanish galleons from all over the world shipped countless gold back to Spain for Philip II and the Spanish nobles to squander. When England dominated the sea, the global wealth swept away was even more incalculable. Right now, Shanghai City seemed to be quietly walking on such a path. In addition to the ransom, there were also 23 Spanish galleons, each equipped with 20 Spanish cannons. In addition, there were also 36 Carrack galleons, each equipped with 10 cannons. There were more than 800 Spanish cannons alone. In addition to these ready-made cannons, when the matter here was over, Ouyang Shua also planned to send a team of frogmen to the place where the 4 major battle groups of the Spanish fleet sank to salvage the cannons that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. That was the real big fish. Preliminary estimates said that there were no less than 5,000 cannons. These cannons were forged with the entire Spanish nation's resources, and now they all benefited Shanghai City. War windfall, it's really war windfall. Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. In addition to the warships and cannons, there were also the naval officers and soldiers who were abandoned by the Lord. All of them were taken in by Shanghai City. Since pirates could turn over a new leaf, why would Ouyang Shua mind the Spanish officers and soldiers, changing sides? In the end, a total of more than 56,000 naval officers and soldiers joined Shanghai City. Along with them were more than 20,000 sailors, first officers, and other senior crew members. In other words, as long as they were equipped with warships, Shanghai City could immediately form half a fleet. These naval officers and sailors were the treasures that Ouyang Shua had spent a lot of effort on. For Ouyang Shua, there was no end to the money. Building a truly powerful navy was the fundamental guarantee of everything. Defeating the Spanish Invincible Fleet was the best opportunity for Shanghai City's navy to enter the Mediterranean Sea. Weren't these naval officers and sailors the most valuable asset? Ouyang Shua did not think that the Spanish would really give up after suffering such a huge loss. Next, Ouyang Shua would take a series of actions to curb the Spanish's retaliation, re-establish the order of the Mediterranean Sea, and allow Shanghai City's military presence to be recognized by the Mediterranean countries. This was very difficult, but Ouyang Shua was very confident. Now, he not only held one good card in his hand, but several good cards. Ouyang Shua still had to carefully plan how to operate it to ensure that nothing went wrong. Before that, Ouyang Shua had to meet another person, and that was Alvaro, who he had forcefully detained. Whether Ouyang Shua's next plan could be successfully carried out largely depended on whether this stubborn old man was willing to cooperate. Only by truly subduing Alvaro would he be considered to have succeeded halfway. Obviously, this was not an easy task. Chapter 666. 3:00 in the afternoon, in the reception room of the Dragonhead. After everything was ready, the fleet set off to the place where the Spanish Invincible Fleet sank to salvage the cannons. Ouyang Shua finally had time to meet Alvaro. "I've heard a lot about you." Ouyang Shua smiled. After learning about Alvaro's origin, Ouyang Shua's interest suddenly increased. In ancient times, China had always lacked admirals, and the limited few were basically searched by Shanghai City. However, Western countries were rich in admirals. Shanghai City dominated the land of the 4 seas, and naturally, it should have a global vision and accept talents from all over the world. Therefore, Ouyang Shua didn't mind having a Spanish admiral under his command. Alvaro, on the other hand, was stumped and unwilling to give in. "Old Admiral, Facts have proven that the Spanish invincible fleet is already outdated and no longer has its glory. Now it can only show its power in the Mediterranean. But our Shanghai city is different. The fleet crosses the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans, across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This is a true global fleet. Ouyang Shua said. Alvaro's eyes moved. So what? So what? Leading a global fleet is the dream of every marine admiral. Could it be that the general is old and no longer has this ambition? Ouyang Shua laughed. Humph. Old admiral, as long as you agree to join Shanghai City, this marquis promises that the fleet will only take the port of Gibraltar and will no longer attack the Spanish mainland. How about it? Ouyang Shua was ready to take a step back. Originally, he didn't think that he could destroy Spain in one fell swoop. The strategic goal of suppressing the arrogance of the Spanish invincible fleet has already been achieved. It can be imagined that within the next year, the Spanish invincible fleet will stop fighting in the Mediterranean. If he can temporarily retreat in exchange for the loyalty of an admiral, Ouyang Shua felt that it was worth it. Is this true? Alvaro couldn't believe it. The Spanish invincible fleet was wiped out in this battle. The long coastline was almost undefended at this time, and could only be ravaged by the ocean-going fleet. At this time, the other party is not going to continue to expand the victory? Alvaro looked at Ouyang Shua's eyes full of curiosity. This person is so young, can he resist such temptation? Ouyang Shua saw this and smiled indifferently. This marquis never lies. Old general, you should know that in Shanghai City, mutants and natives are all equal existences. There is absolutely no distinction between them. Ouyang Shua's words poked at the scar in Alvaro's heart. The performance of the Spaniards in this battle, especially their indifferent attitude towards the sailors, really disappointed Alvaro. All right, I promise you. Alvaro raised his head with a resolute look in his eyes. I only hope that you will not forget your promise today. Otherwise, I will not give up even if I have to risk my life. Of course. Ouyang Shua nodded. General Alvaro pays his respects to the Marquis. Alvaro did as the Romans did and formally paid his respects. Ouyang Shua nodded and checked Alvaro's attribute. Name, Alvaro de Bazan, Emperor level, a title, the father of Spanish soldiers, dynasty, 16th century/Spain identity, General of Shanghai City, profession, Special General loyalty, 65 points, Commander, 87 strength, 75 intelligence, 75 politics, 65 specialty, naval battle, increase the range and power of the cannons by 35, increase the speed of the warship by 25, increase the defense of the warship by 25, increase the morale of the Navy in naval battles by 30, increase the tactics of the Navy by 15, weapon, Spanish sword of formation evaluation. Alvaro de Bazan, 1st Marquis of Santa Cruz. Proficient in tactics, talented in formulating plans, and outstanding leadership and management skills. He was Philip II's most capable general. Gaia used a unified standard to rate the generals of various countries. At the same time, it would make a second revision based on the country's national strength, scale, and historical heritage. As such, some countries' historical generals were only at the emperor rank or even the king rank. If they could not even reach the king rank, Gaia would directly revise them to the king rank. In other words, regardless of the size of a country, they would at least have a king-rank general. Spain was once a maritime hegemon, a powerful country in Europe, and it had a certain historical heritage. Although it could not compare to the giant China, Gaia's overall evaluation of it was still extremely high. The entire country had a god-ranked general, the Spanish god of war, Duke Alva Fernando, who was known as the Blood Butcher. Other than that, there were several emperor-ranked generals, and Alvaro was one of them. Without a doubt, Alvaro's addition to the Shanghai City Navy was of extraordinary significance. Just as Ouyang Shua was about to discuss the job arrangements with Alvaro, A system announcement spread throughout the world. Global announcement. Congratulations to the feudal lord of the China server for successfully subduing the Spanish Navy's Admiral Alvaro, becoming the first feudal lord in the world to subdue another country's historical general. Special reward. 10,000 achievement points, 50,000 reputation points, and a king rank summoning amulet. Congratulations to the player. The moment the announcement was released, the entire world was shocked. What shocked the players was not just that Alvaro had subdued another country's general, but the hidden message behind the announcement. It was obvious that in the war between Shanghai City and Spain, Spain had been unexpectedly defeated. As the news of the war spread on the forums, the conflict between Shanghai City and Spain had long been known to the entire world. Before the war, no one believed that Shanghai City could defeat the powerful Spain like they had conquered Star. Especially for the Mediterranean countries, the Spanish invincible fleet was a nightmarish existence. It was because of this that the European countries had no intention of intervening. All they did was sit quietly by the side and watch the show. But in the end, Spain's most powerful admiral had been subdued by Shanghai City's feudal lord, Alvaro. The development of the matter could be said to be full of twists and turns. Various parties had different reactions to this. As soon as the announcement was released, the Mediterranean countries were the most shocked. Players from Italy, Greece, France, Egypt, and Turkey had different thought. Their first thought was to confirm what kind of impact the Spanish invincible fleet had encountered in this battle. Can the Spanish invincible fleet continue to dominate the Mediterranean? They wanted to confirm this so that they could adjust their respective naval strategies in time. If possible, they could take advantage of this opportunity to rise. Among them, the most excited was France. In the middle and late 17th century, the Kingdom of France had also been glorious. In those glorious 50 years, the French navy started from a group of broken sampans. Under the protection of Richelieu, Colbert, and the Marquis de Cernel, and under the illumination of the Sun King Louis XIV, the French navy had defeated various great powers of the sea, Spain, the Netherlands, and even England. It grew into a naval power that once controlled the Atlantic and Mediterranean waters, and was the #1 naval power at that time. However, in the Battle of La and Cape Verde in 1692, the emerging French navy was defeated by the Anglo-Dutch fleet, and thus lost control of the sea. The French navy quickly withered in the dust of history. Because of this, the feudal lords of France were more eager to rise again than any other Mediterranean country. French Quarter, Vic City. As the #1 feudal lord of France, Henry had also shown his face on the global stage, and was even ranked among the top 10 feudal lords in the world. But in the Mediterranean Sea, Henry was extremely low-key. It was not that he did not want to be high-profile, but he was overwhelmed by the Spanish invincible fleet. With this announcement, Henry finally saw an opportunity for France to enter the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, as early as the start of the war between Shanghai City and Spain, Henry had been paying attention to this great war. Marquis Lienzo completed the large-scale storyline mission, The Lost Atlantis, which gave Henry a glimmer of hope. Even so, he did not act rashly. When the announcement was made, Henry finally decided to attack. "Come in!" "Here." The clerk walked in. "3 things." Henry raised 3 fingers. "First, send out all the scouts. We must get to the bottom of the Spanish War." Henry hooked his first finger. "Understood." "Second, order the Gallic fleet to enter the first level of combat readiness, and be ready to attack the Mediterranean Sea at any time." The Gallic fleet was the secret weapon of Vic City. It had been hidden by Henry all along, and now it was time to show its power. "Third, send someone to contact the ocean fleet of Shanghai City and show their goodwill," Henry said finally. The clerk's eyes narrowed, and he did not ask any questions. He turned around and left. In the dim study, Henry muttered to himself, "Marquis Lienzo, don't let me down. Apart from the Mediterranean Sea countries, the European countries were also alarmed. England region, Castle Avic. Subduing the Spanish navy? Interesting. William sat in the study on the highest floor of the castle, looking lazy. The ocean fleet's next stop should be here, right? Yes. The clerk opposite him looked solemn. There was no doubt that Shanghai City had been recognized as a war maniac, but the troublemaker title had long been recognized by the players of all countries. Wherever the ocean fleet went, trouble followed. As the terminal of the ocean fleet, how could England be free of trouble in the future? Sir, we should make plans early, the clerk advised. William raised an eyebrow, picked up the red wine on the table, and slowly took a sip. He said lazily, "What plans? We might even get a big deal." Big deal? The clerk was puzzled. William did not intend to explain anything. He changed the topic and asked casually, "Did Annie go out again?" The clerk immediately broke out in cold sweat. "Please forgive me, sir. Miss Annie seized 5 warships the day before yesterday and led her Iron Lady out to the sea to eliminate the pirate." "What nonsense!" William reprimanded, but there was no hint of reproach on his face. It was obvious that he doted on his sister. "Remember to arrange for the fleet to escort them." "Yes, sir." The clerk did not hesitate. Chapter 667. In terms of shock, the Spanish mainland was the most shocked. The Spanish Invincible Fleet, which was still on its way back, was naturally ashamed when it heard the system announcement, but they had already been humiliated once and quickly adapted to it. What's bound to come will always come. Cassius was even more furious, his eyes were red, and he was about to burst into flames. No one knew if he was angry at Ouyang Shuo for being unreasonable, or angry at Alvaro for not having integrity, or even angry at his compatriots for being too selfish, or all three. The ones who really couldn't accept it were the Spanish players. Such a system announcement was undoubtedly a slap in the face to the proud and prideful Spaniards. What the hell is going on? The Spaniards were dumbfounded. Didn't the Invincible Fleet vow to completely crush the ocean fleet before the expedition? How did their own admiral become the enemy in a blink of an eye? Was the fleet of Tortosa ambushed and had a problem, or was the entire Invincible Fleet defeated? The Spaniards, more than any other country's players, were eager to know the truth of the war. The city of Tortosa was Cassius' territory. The Spanish domestic forum directly exploded, and the panicked Spaniards were eager to know the truth, eager for someone to tell them what was going on. Finally, the players who were still drifting at sea could not bear the pressure exerted by the domestic players on the forum and simply disclosed the war process directly on the forum. As soon as the news came out, the whole country was shocked. Is today April Fool's Day? Our invincible naval fleet was annihilated in a single day. Oh God, don't make such a joke. Tell me this is not true. The proud Spaniards simply couldn't accept such a fact. Subsequently, the players posted photos of the Spanish galleons sinking to the bottom of the sea on the forum. In the endless sea, countless Spanish galleons and Clark galleons sank to the bottom of the sea at the same time, revealing only the sails, indicating their identity and former glory. Such a shocking photo directly dragged the Spaniards into the unknown abyss of hell. My God, it's unbelievable. Is the other party the devil? How is it possible that our invincible battleship sank like this? Oh my God, who can tell me what witchcraft the enemy cast on the battleship? The proud Spaniards couldn't wake up from such a huge blow. In other words, they would rather not wake up than face such a cruel reality. The Invincible Fleet, the dominator of the Mediterranean Sea, and the most brilliant diamond on the crown of Spain, had all sunk overnight, completely becoming a thing of the past and turning into a pile of rotten wood. The proud empire seemed to be heading towards desolation. The only ones who were still sober were probably the Spanish media. They combined the information disclosed on the forum and wrote a piece of heavy news that the deaf could hear. Without exception, the pictures accompanying the news all used the despairing picture of the shipwreck from the forum. The darkest day in Spain. Glory collapses, invincibility destroys. Without the invincible fleet, how will the Empire continue to control the sea? Who will save Spain's faded glory? The answer was obvious. The only thing that could save Spain now was the royal navy of the Spanish royal family. They were still in the midst of the Kingdom War, and the royal capital's army could theoretically be mobilized. The only problem was that Shanghai City did not attack Madrid. Therefore, according to the rules of the Kingdom War, the two sides were still in the stage of a local war, and the royal capital's army would not intervene in the battlefield. The desperate Spaniards couldn't care less, especially the players in Madrid. They gathered together and petitioned in front of the palace, asking the great Philip II to order the Spanish Royal Navy to attack. Resolutely defend the glory of the Empire? We are willing to be the vanguard and pledge our lives to follow you. Only your Majesty has mercy. Blood for blood, Spain will never back down. The banners put up by the players were more radical than the other. In order to increase their persuasion, the players even cut their wrists and stained the banners red with their blood. At the same time, countless bloody handprints were printed on them. The proud Spaniards decided to practice the medieval chivalry, never compromise, and fight to the death. Philip II of the secluded dwelling palace did not know how to deal with the players' petition. With his belligerent nature, he naturally wanted to agree to the players' petition, but he was limited by the system's rules and could not. The rules set by Gaia were the highest rules that NPCs must follow. We can only blame the inhuman fleet for being too disappointing, Philip II said helplessly. In the end, the deep palace could only respond in silence. The Spanish players, who had been shouting at the top of their lungs for a day, could not hide the despair in their eyes when they saw that the palace did not respond. Is Spain really going to be finished? Some people lamented, and some even committed suicide in front of the palace square. The smear of blood on the stone steps became the last afterglow of the Spanish chivalry. Dazzling, dazzling, and sad. At this moment, the defeated army on the small boats finally arrived at the Spanish port. When the players received the news, they were naturally furious. Someone took a picture of the scene of 6,000 to 7,000 small boats entering the port and posted it on the forum. This completely ignited the anger in the hearts of the Spaniards. How can the shame of the Empire come back? It's a shame to be associated with those who live without purpose. Eternal sinners of the Empire, hurry up and commit suicide to atone for your sins. More and more players gathered at the port, collectively denouncing the defeated army. If it were not for the army maintaining order at the scene, a bloody conflict would have broken out. The one who lost the battle was naturally ashamed. They also felt wronged. Most of the players still did not understand why they were defeated. They just woke up one night and saw warships sinking one after another. Then, they were surrounded by the ocean fleet of Shanghai City. The whole process was completely confusing, isn't it? We are also very innocent. The players shouted in their hearts, but they did not dare to express it in public. They were full of passion and went to battle, thinking of winning glory for the country. Who would have thought that not only would they lose 200 gold coins before fighting a battle, but they would also become the sinners and shame of the Empire in the blink of an eye? How could outsiders understand this kind of grievance? Helpless, the angry domestic players had already lost their mind. How could they listen to their excuses? In response to the defeated soldiers were vicious curses, countless rotten tomatoes, rotten eggs, and rotten cabbages. In humiliation, the soldiers quickly fled the scene through the teleportation formation with rotten leaves on their head. They either returned to their territories, returned to the guild encampment, or simply returned to their huts to lick their wounds alone. Even if they went back, they still had to bear the strange looks from their friends and relatives around them. This day was really unbearable for the soldiers of the invincible fleet. The bustling port was more than half empty in less than half an hour. The players who had no target to vent their anger wandered unconsciously in the port. Their eyes were blank and helpless, and they did not know where to go. The small boats docked at the port were unusually eye-catching. "Burn them," someone suggested. "That's right, just burn them all. I get angry just looking at them." The desperate players needed to vent the accumulated anger in their hearts through radical actions. Naturally, many people responded to their call. In an instant, thousands of small boats were all set on fire in less than half an hour. The raging fire soared into the sky, dyeing the port completely red. Countless ferocious and desperate faces were reflected in the fire. The fire spread, and no one went to extinguish it. It even spread to the port facilities, turning them into ashes. The charred port became the most vivid portrayal of the current situation of the Empire. As night fell, the players who were unwilling to give up gradually dispersed. Even more turbulent waves were slowly brewing and fermenting in the night. Tonight, no one could sleep. The first thing the Overlord players did when they returned to their territories was to issue an emergency recruitment order overnight. At the same time, they ordered the shipyards to work 24 hours a day to build as many warships as possible. They knew too well that without the protection of the Navy, the coastal territories would become the first target of the ocean fleet. If they did not step up their preparations for war, it was very likely that they would not even be able to keep their territories. Thousands of craftsmen were mobilized and began to build war fortresses along the port. The current Spain could not afford a second failure. If they lost at sea, they must defend the land. Otherwise, the Empire would be finished. For the Empire, and for their lives, the coastal overlords gambled everything. All the funds in the territory's inventory were spent and transformed into soldiers, warships, and war fortresses. Reporters from various major media outlets also took action overnight. There were too many details and secrets waiting for them to uncover in this strange naval battle. Under the guise of revealing the truth of the war for the people, the reporters began to break through the defenses of the players who participated in the war one by one. Early the next morning, the headlines of all the major media outlets published shocking news. The matter of the sky-high ransom was unsurprisingly dug out by the reporters and made public. This was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire. The domestic players who had just calmed down took to the streets to protest again. The players who participated in the war this time were like street rats, condemned and disliked by the domestic players, and did not dare to go out at all. Of course, there were also rational media outlets. They did not focus on gossip, and they would not endlessly provoke the sensitive nerves of the players for the sake of newspaper sales. Their eyes were focused on the battlefield. The most fundamental point of doubt was, how did the invincible warship sink? The players interviewed ordinary players, guild leaders, and lords. From their oral accounts, the truth of the matter was gradually restored, and the fog of war was uncovered. The Spanish players looked at the war report with a blank expression. There was no doubt that their enemy, the ocean fleet of Shanghai City, had mastered incredible technology or equipment. Such tactics were simply the nemesis of warships on the sea. P.S. It's a new week, asking for recommendation votes and monthly vote. Brothers, work hard, don't let our votes fall. Chapter 668. The Spaniard got to the bottom of the matter and finally locked onto Atlantis. Other than that, there is no other possibility. The Spaniard was certain. When the truth came out, the Spaniards had mixed feelings. If they really lost to Shanghai City's fleet, the proud Spaniards would probably find it hard to calm down. In their eyes, the eastern countries represented by Shanghai City in the game were synonymous with backwardness and ignorance. However, if the Atlantis civilization played a decisive role in the war, it would be a different story. In the eyes of the Westerners, the Atlantis civilization represented an advanced civilization system. Now that I think about it, it's not too shameful. The Spaniard comforted himself. As a result, the Spaniards had mixed feelings about the reappearance of Atlantis. They had a love-hate relationship with the culprit who had caused the destruction of the Invincible Fleet. The battle with Shanghai City's fleet had caused Spain to lag behind the other countries in the Mediterranean Sea in terms of the exploration of Atlantis. If they didn't act now, they would only be left with the leftovers. The problem was that the destruction of the Invincible Armada made it difficult for the Spaniards to go out to sea. Not to mention, Shanghai City's fleet was still lurking in the waters of Gibraltar, eyeing them covetously. Could it be that we have to let Shanghai City extort them again? The Spaniard wanted to spit blood at the thought. Right now, we don't have to worry about whether or not we can go out to sea. Instead, we have to guard against Shanghai City's fleet attacking the coastal cities. The Kingdom War is imminent, so let's leave the Atlantis Island matter for later. You're right. It was only then that the Spaniards realized that the Kingdom War was far from over. The entirety of Spain immediately fell into a frenzy of preparations for war, and they were determined to snipe the invading enemies on land. Shanghai City dares to invade us? We'll make sure they never return. It had to be said that even if a proud race encountered setbacks, it was difficult for them to change their nature. With the Spanish causing such a ruckus, the spies of the various countries were relieved. They didn't have to spend much effort on it. The entire Mediterranean Sea knew what was going on, and the relevant information was quickly reported to the lords of the various countries. This time, the Mediterranean Sea was truly in an uproar. The Spanish Invincible Fleet has been completely annihilated. The glory is gone. This news was too shocking. Not only France, but Italy, Greece, Egypt, and other countries also saw the light to attack the Mediterranean. It quickly became the consensus of all the countries in the Mediterranean Sea to take this opportunity to break Spain's sea control in one fell swoop. Of course, there were also lords who were wary of Shanghai City's fleet. Even the invincible Spanish fleet had been defeated by the ocean-going fleet. Would there really be space for them to move about in the Mediterranean Sea in the future? I'm just afraid that we'll reject the tiger at the front door and the wolf at the back door, someone said worriedly. On the one hand, they were afraid of the power of Shanghai City's fleet, but on the other hand, they were unwilling to give up on the opportunity to rise in the Mediterranean Sea. Just like that, the various forces met frequently and began to form alliances. The entire Mediterranean Sea became treacherous. On the other hand, Lord Henry of France was extremely resolute. As soon as he received the news, he immediately recalled his liaison officer and increased the conditions that he promised in order to form a strategic alliance with Shanghai City. The Mediterranean Sea was about to overturn, yet Ouyang Shuo seemed as if nothing had happened, and he continued to act according to plan. In Dragon Head's reception room, Ouyang Shuo and Alvaro were discussing the appointment. Alvaro was born in Spain and was very familiar with the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. In history, it was under Alvaro's plan that the Spanish Invincible Fleet left the Mediterranean Sea and set foot in the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo had no reason to transfer Alvaro back to his country. Otherwise, it would be a reckless waste of God's resources. The best choice was to form a new fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. Ouyang Shuo planned to form a fifth fleet under the Nanyang Navy, the Mediterranean Fleet, with Alvaro as the admiral of the Mediterranean Fleet. The first batch of backbone of the Mediterranean Fleet was more than 56,000 Spanish officers and soldiers who had already submitted to Shanghai City, as well as more than 20,000 sailors, first officers, and other senior crew members. Of course, according to the usual practice, the Mediterranean Fleet also had to be mixed. Ouyang Shuo asked Zheng He to select a group of backbone generals from the ocean-going fleet to join the Mediterranean Fleet. At the same time, it was stipulated that more than half of the backbone generals and soldiers of the Mediterranean Fleet must be Shanghai City's native officers and soldiers. In this way, the Mediterranean Fleet would be composed of three types of personnel: the Spanish Navy, the native officers and soldiers of Shanghai City, and the pirate prisoners of war in the Gulf of Aden. The three would integrate and form a healthy internal competition. The Mediterranean fleet was isolated in the sea. Not to mention that Ouyang Shuo was only acquainted with Alvaro, even the generals he was familiar with would have to take some precautions. The shortage of manpower in the ocean-going fleet would naturally be filled by the Spanish Navy. According to the establishment of the Shanghai City Navy, a full-fledged fleet would have a total of 110,000 soldiers and 14,000 crew members. The fleet would have 5 formations, each consisting of 22,000 soldiers and 2,800 crew members. According to the current number of soldiers, the Mediterranean fleet could only form 2.5 formations for the time being. Ouyang Shuo gave Alvaro 3 formations, and he would find a way to fill the missing 10,000 soldiers in the future. The Mediterranean fleet's patrol area was not only the Mediterranean Sea, but also the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It could even be said that the navy stationed in Somalia's Friendship City was under the jurisdiction of the Mediterranean fleet. Needless to say, this would be the fleet with the widest area under the jurisdiction of the Nanyang Navy. The moment he received the appointment, Alvaro's loyalty directly increased by 10 points. He did not expect the Marquis to think so highly of him and give him such an important task as soon as he arrived. Even the current size of the Mediterranean fleet was comparable to the historical Spanish Invincible Fleet. Not to mention that the Marquis had already promised to fill in the remaining 2 formations when the time was right. Of course, Alvaro was a veteran after all, and he immediately got into character after the appointment. "May I ask, the Marquis, how will the Mediterranean fleet's uniforms, weapons, and warships be settled? Also, how will the fleet station and logistics be arranged?" Alvaro was very straightforward. Zheng He, who was beside him, frowned when he heard this. From Zheng He's point of view, Alvaro's words were already somewhat disgraceful. "General Alvaro, please watch your words. Don't be rude to the Marquis," Zheng He reminded him. "What?" Alvaro raised his eyebrows, not understanding what was going on. Ouyang Shuo saw this, but he smiled and waved his hand. In fact, this was the cultural difference between the East and the West. Easterners spoke in a reserved manner, and were essentially modest and polite. Westerners spoke bluntly and pursued efficiency. The two had nothing to do with superiority or inferiority, but the cultural difference. "Good question, General. The Spanish Navy's uniforms must all be changed. As for the weapons and equipment, General, you can discuss with Governor Zheng He and adjust flexibly according to the characteristics of the soldiers' martial arts," Ouyang Shuo said. Alvaro and Zheng He looked at each other and nodded in unison. "Understood." Speaking of which, Zheng He was Alvaro's direct superior. As a soldier, Alvaro naturally would not be arrogant the moment he arrived. He had to respect his superior. Alvaro also realized that Zheng He's reminder was actually out of kindness. It seemed that if he wanted to integrate into the system of Shanghai City, he had to take the initiative to get closer to his superior, Zheng He, and learn more from him. The warships needed by the Mediterranean fleet will be built by the shipyard in Somalia's Friendship City. It is estimated that they will all be delivered within 2 months. Ouyang Shuo did not intend to use the captured Spanish galleons. Ouyang Shuo paused for a moment, then continued, "The problems of the fleet station and logistics will be solved together. I have decided to immediately send troops to Gibraltar after salvaging the cannons and retrieve them." The reception room fell silent, and smoke instantly filled the air. On the 29th of July, the ocean-going fleet returned with a full load and once again occupied Gibraltar. The Spanish lord, Juan, had previously left a portion of his troops at the port. When the news of the Invincible Fleet's defeat came, he immediately fled in panic. Before he left, he kidnapped all the civilians and even burned down the port. It seemed that they did not expect to retrieve the port again. The current Gibraltar port was basically a ghost town. Looking at the charred port, Ouyang Shua and the others had different expressions. Alvaro's expression was the most complicated. He did not expect the Spanish to be so resolute. "All right, the past can't be chased." Ouyang Shua smiled. "Let us build an invincible port that truly guards the throat of the Mediterranean Sea on top of these ruins." In the game, Gibraltar had a huge concave shape, with a huge rolling mountain range surrounding an excellent natural harbor. The port was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, and the other side faced the sea. The mountains were tens of thousands of feet high, and the cliffs were so high that it was difficult for birds to fly. It was perfectly isolated from the interior of Spain, and there was not even a narrow path. At the foot of the mountain was a long and narrow arc of land with an area of less than 50 square kilometers. It was even smaller than Friendship City. Because it was near the sea, the land was heavily saline, and it was difficult for ordinary crops to grow there. In the past, the residents mainly made a living by fishing. At most, they would specially transport some soil from other places and spread it in their vegetable fields to grow some vegetables. Their lives were extremely poor. In the 3rd year of Gaia, where ocean trade had not yet flourished, the strategic position of Gibraltar port had not yet been highlighted. There were very few merchant ships coming and going from the Mediterranean Sea, and it was very difficult for the local residents to buy necessities. Even so, there were still people living there. This was because the wilderness in the game was not a peaceful place. Although Gibraltar was poor, it could be considered a paradise. No one expected it to change owners so many times in a short period of time. Ouyang Shua no longer had time to care about the fate of the civilians that Juan had kidnapped. What he was thinking about now was how to build this place into a war fortress so that it would not be taken back by the radical Spanish. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.